Chapter 1485. I didn't expect there to be a dimensional mark here. The consequences of a Yun-class Yuan-Ko's self-destruction were terrifying. The dimensional wall at the core of the explosion was actually torn apart, revealing a huge dimensional crack. On the other side of the crack was a dimensional space. However, what surprised Guhan was that he could actually see a colorful thread at the opening of the crack, extending into the depths of the dimensional space. This wasn't the first time Guhan had seen such a colorful thread. 20 years ago, when Guhan had been led by Liu Bei and the others to the Martyr's Palace's headquarters, he had found the hidden Martyr's Palace's headquarters through this thread. In fact, this was not a thread, but a special mark. By following this mark, one would be able to find some secrets hidden in the dimensional space. At the same time, by following this mark, one would be able to successfully return to the real world without the danger of getting lost in the dimensional space. It seems like this is a gateway used by a major Yuan-Ko faction to enter and exit our world. That's why the dimensional wall here is very weak and was blasted apart by a Yun-class Yuan-Ko's self-destruction. Guhan observed carefully and said thoughtfully, "Which Yuan-Ko faction's lair does this dimensional mark lead to?" Lu Shihua asked curiously. "I don't know." Guhan shook his head. "Unless we follow the mark and enter the dimensional space, we won't be able to find out which Yuan-Ko faction's lair it is." "Then let's go in and find it," Song Yifei immediately said excitedly. "No." Guhan refused without hesitation. The reason was simple. It had been 25 days since Yuzhong City had been surrounded, and the situation there had to be worsening by the day. Song Yifei and Lu Shihua had already obtained 10 million quarks of sword essence. Their top priority now was to bring them back to Mingyuan City and help Song Yifei ascend the throne. Then, they would go to Yuzhong City to find Lu Shihua's 12-winged angel sword. This was what Guhan wanted to do urgently. As for this dimensional mark, it wouldn't disappear for a while, so he could investigate it later. Even if it disappeared, it was not a big deal. It was not on the same level as the safety of mankind. All right. Hearing Guhan's decision, Song Yifei was a little disappointed. At the same time, he muttered to himself thoughtfully, "This is such a coincidence. The places where these three Yuan-Kos gather happen to be where the dimensional mark is. This is too much of a coincidence." The speaker did not mean it, but the listener did. Song Yifei's unintentional remark made Guhan's heart skip a beat. "That's right. Isn't it too much of a coincidence?" "No, this definitely isn't a coincidence. There must be some inevitable factors involved." Guhan rubbed his nose as he pondered. "During the battle, I discovered that there were many defensive measures built here. These measures were definitely not built in a hurry. They must have been built over a long period of time. In other words, this location should be the base of one of the three Yuan-Kos. It's because this place is well-equipped that the three Yuan-Kos chose to hide here. If that's the case, the dimensional mark was built in the base of a U-level Yuan-Kos. Who would believe that this Yuan-Ko has nothing to do with the Yuan-Ko's force behind this dimensional mark? This Yuan-Ko must be one of the representatives of that force in the human world. That's why they gradually built the mark in their base to protect the headquarters." Thinking up to this point, Guhan immediately pulled up all the information on the three Yuan-Kos that had just died. He found out that the area around this area was mainly occupied by U-level Yuan-Ko named Xiaolinger. This Xiaolinger wasn't a fierce Yuan-Ko. Unless humans took the initiative to enter his territory, he rarely took the initiative to attack humans. His relationship with humans was quite good, and humans never took the initiative to attack Xiaolinger. If it wasn't for the three Yuan-Kos huddling together, Guhan wouldn't have taken the initiative to find trouble with this Yuan-Ko. However, it just so happened that Thunder God Thor was one of the three Yuan-Kos, so Guhan had to kill his way here and kill Xiaolinger along the way. Now that he thought about it, although Xiaolinger was indeed a U-level Yuan-Kos, her real strength was terrible. She was the first Yuan-Ko that Guhan killed. Her real strength was probably the worst U-level Yuan-Kos that Guhan had ever seen. There's something wrong with this Xiaolinger. Guhan thought about it and felt that something was wrong. He began to search for information on Xiaolinger on the personal terminal. However, This Xiao Linger was too low-key, and humans had too little information on her. Other than knowing that Xiao Linger appeared in this place 400 years ago and had a docile personality, he couldn't find any valuable information on her. Yifei, does Mingyuan City know anything about this Xiao Linger? Gohan saw that he couldn't find any clues in the human's information, so he turned to Song Yifei and asked. The contact between Mingyuan City and Yuanko's was completely different from the contact between humans, so there might be some valuable information in Mingyuan City. Xiao Linger. This name sounds familiar. Sure enough, Gohan had asked the right question. Song Yifei thought for a moment and said, I remember now. More than 10 years ago, this Xiao Linger seemed to have come to Mingyuan City. At that time, a human consigned a set of red sandalwood prayer beads to us, and this Xiao Linger bought it at a high price. At that time, I thought it was a little strange. Humans had long stopped believing in Buddhism, and only those Yuan-ko who believed in Buddhism were interested in the prayer beads. However, with the disappearance of Spirited Mountain, the number of Yuan-ko who believed in Buddhism decreased greatly. I originally thought that the prayer beads wouldn't be sold for 10 or 20 years, but it was only on the shelf for 2 days, and Xiao Linger bought it at a high price. I saw that he was dressed in white, and he had 2 beautiful maids with him. He looked like an elegant young master, but no matter how I looked at him, he didn't look like a Buddhist Yuan-ko. Song Yifei recalled with a strange expression. By the way, I've seen the account books of Mingyuan City. This Xiao Linger is considered a regular customer of Mingyuan City. He has come to Mingyuan City more than 20 times, and every time, he just bought something and left. He can be considered a loyal customer. Song Yifei smiled and said, Strange. If he is an elegant young master, why is he in such a hurry to buy a string of prayer beads? Also, if he has nothing to do with the world, why does he come here so often? Gohan was confused as well. After thinking for a while, she suddenly asked Song Yifei, Yifei, do you know the origin of the red sandalwood prayer beads? Hey, you've asked the right person. Others might not know, but I'm the only one who knows. Song Yifei chuckled. The human smuggler who sold the prayer beads was also received by me, and we have a good relationship. I asked him about it out of curiosity, and he told me that it was not an ordinary prayer bead, but a prayer bead that was found on the battlefield in the Alps Mountains. It was said that the prayer beads were the beads that were hanging on the wrist of the desolate level Yuan-ko Vairocana. In the end, it was scattered by a sword that came from the sky. A sword bearer had a sudden idea, and it took him a lot of effort to pick up 18 prayer beads. He then pieced them together and passed them down as a family heirloom. Later on, the sword bearer's family declined, and in order to make a living, his descendants sold the prayer beads to a merchant, who then sold them in Mingyuan City. Then it makes sense. Gohan nodded thoughtfully, and a look of understanding appeared on his face. Now I know where the dimensional mark leads to. Where does it lead to? Song Yifei immediately asked curiously. It leads to the spiritual mountain, which is the lair where Vairocana cultivates. Gohan sneered. I've read in a book that the cultivation of Buddhism is particular about the power of wish, and the power of wish likes to be attached to personal items such as prayer beads. Vairocana was seriously injured, and if he wanted to recover, he would definitely need a lot of power of wish. The prayer beads that he used before must contain a lot of power of wish, which is just right for Vairocana to recover. And this Xiao Linger must be a chess piece that Vairocana has hidden in the world. She's a chess piece used to collect all sorts of resources to help him recuperate. That's why there's a dimensional mark in his lair that leads directly to the spiritual mountain. There's no mistake, the other side of this dimensional mark is the spiritual mountain. Oh, now that you mention it, it might really be the spiritual mountain behind this line. Song Yifei agreed. But Master, that's not what we heard from Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. Didn't Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva say that? As long as you look at the place where the first ray of dawn appears when the sun rises every day, you will be able to find the dimensional mark that leads to the spiritual mountain. This place is located in the far west. Where does the morning glow come from? Lu Shihua immediately asked in confusion as he recalled the encounter between him and his master. Didn't I tell you that? Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva is not worthy of our trust. Only he knows whether the road he leads to the spiritual mountain or hell. Guhan sneered. Forget it. Why do we care so much? Let's go back to Mingyuan City first. I can't wait to become the emperor. Ha ha ha, Gahan. No matter how powerful you are, so what? I'm still one step faster than you. Song Yifei laughed proudly. No, I changed my mind. To Song Yifei's chuckle, Gahan immediately changed his mind. Let's not go back to Mingyuan City. Let's go to the spiritual mountain first. Chapter 1486. Why did Guhan change his original plan? Why did he put Yuzhong City in danger? Why did he take the risk to enter Mount Lingshan with an uncertain future? The reason was simple. Guhan also wanted to ascend the throne and become an emperor. If Guhan wanted to become an emperor, he could not do without the celestial trapping sword, the last sword lady of the 4 celestial swords. In fact, Gahan did not need to look for his emperor sword lady. The moment Gahan became a celestial sword wielder, Gahan already knew where his emperor sword lady was. Because of the yin-yang sword technique, Gahan had to have 2 matching emperor sword ladies. Such a sword lady was hard to find. As far as Gahan knew, among all the emperor sword ladies, there were no matching sword ladies. However, after knowing the origins of the 4 celestial swords and the Xianyuan sword, Gahan knew which emperor sword lady he should choose. Previously, it was said that the 4 celestial swords and the Xianyuan sword had the same origin. They were both Khanate cardinal treasures that had fallen from Panga's body. Therefore, the Xianyuan sword and the 4 celestial swords were compatible. Even if the Xianyuan sword and the celestial extinguishing sword were unwilling to admit this, they could not deny it. In the end, under Gahan's interrogation, they could only admit that they could be called sisters. The Xianyuan sword was already an emperor sword lady. As for the 4 celestial swords, the celestial trapping sword had not been synchronized. Coincidentally, there were 2 sword ladies. These are the only 2 sword ladies that Gahan could synchronize. As for the celestial trapping sword's grade, according to the celestial sword, they were all top-notch emperor sword ladies. However, due to the battle with sect leader Tongtian, their origin had been damaged. As a result, the celestial trapping sword and the celestial extinguishing sword had become spirit swords, while the celestial trapping sword had become immortal swords. The celestial trapping sword had lost all its power and became an ordinary ancient sword lady. However, if the power of the celestial trapping sword could be restored, it could return to the emperor sword level. There is only one way to restore the celestial trapping sword. It was to inject a large amount of chaotic origin power into the celestial trapping sword. Like charging a battery, the celestial trapping sword would be fully charged again. At that moment, the only 2 people in the world who could use the chaotic origin power were the Jade Emperor of the Heavenly Court and Mahavrokana of the Spirited Mountain. Gahan did not have the guts to wander around the Heavenly Court for the time being. There were too many primordial Yuan Ko. Even Jindi managed to make a mess in the Heavenly Court and even killed many powerful Yuan Ko. Jindi could only escape from the Heavenly Court in a sorry state. After that, he never entered the Heavenly Court again. Therefore, before Gahan was sure that he could have Jindi's power, Gahan did not plan to take the risk in the Heavenly Court. The remaining one, Mahavrokana, who had been bullied by dogs, was the best choice. If Mahavrokana could really restore the celestial trapping sword, Gahan, who also had 10 million quarks of sword elements, could also ascend to the throne in an instant. To put it bluntly, once Gahan ascended to the throne, his combat strength would increase by at least 10 Song Yifei's combat strength. As long as Gahan could ascend to the throne, Gahan was confident that he could expel all the 12 Zhu Wus by himself. At the very least, humans could have a safe city again. Considering that Yuzhong City should be able to hold on for another 10 days, Gahan gritted his teeth and changed his mind in an instant. He decided to take all his people into the Spirited Mountain, find Mahavrokana, who is still recuperating, and force him to restore his celestial trapping sword. Guhan's decision was very firm, and Lu Shihua would never object to Guhan's decision. Song Yifei could not dissuade both of them, so the three of them entered the dimensional world together. They followed the colored markings all the way forward. After flying in the dimensional space for a long time, they finally saw a tall and majestic mountain standing in the depths of the dimensional space. A faint golden light enveloped the mountain, making it look like a Buddha. This must be the legendary Spirited Mountain. Song Yifei, who was the most curious, was the first to stand on the land of the Spirited Mountain, followed by Guhan and Lu Shihua. The moment Guhan landed, Guhan released the Celestial Extinguished Sword, the Celestial Slaying Sword, and the Celestial Slaughtering Sword at the same time. As for the other sword ladies, Guhan still kept them in their scabbards. The reason was very simple. The reason why Guhan released the three sword ladies was that they were very familiar with the Spirited Mountain. They could lead the way for him and, at the same time, avoid some dangers in the Spirited Mountain. As for the other sword ladies, in fact, it was not a big deal to release them. However, once there were too many of them, it was easy to cause trouble. Now that they were in this dimensional space that could be dangerous at any time, Guhan had to be cautious and try his best to eliminate all possible dangers. This is the Spirited Mountain. I can't believe I can see it again. How nostalgic. The Celestial Extinguished Sword said with emotion. The Celestial Slaying Sword and the Celestial Slaughtering Sword looked at the scenery of the Spirited Mountain with nostalgic expressions. This should be the reception area of the Spirited Mountain. It is also the mountain gate of the Spirited Mountain. Back then, even the most powerful immortal, even if the Jade Emperor came in person, would obediently land at this reception area and walk up the Spirited Mountain step by step. Don't even think about flying. This is the right that only sages have. The Celestial Extinguishing Sword looked at the surrounding environment and said. Guhan also looked carefully and found that there was indeed a huge stone tablet in front of him. On it, he could vaguely see the words "Welcome Guest." In addition, in the depths of the stone tablet, he could vaguely see a tall building with a few floors. On both sides of the stone tablet, there were two huge doors. On each door, there was a pair of couplets that were written with unknown materials. The first couplet was, 100 feet into the sky, a towering man soars in the sky, lowering one's head to watch the setting sun, stretching one's hand to pluck the flying stars. The open-minded windows store the universe. The rugged buildings connect the screen. The second couplet was talking about Tao in the true hall. The universe imparts scriptures. The flowers are beautiful in spring. The pines are green in the face of rain. The purple Ganoderma immortal fruit is young and beautiful. The elixir wind is elegant, and all senses are spiritual. This couplet is quite arrogant. However, since this is a place second only to sages, it's not too much to use this couplet. Guhan sneered and said with some disdain. However, there was no doubt that this was the mountain gate of the Spirited Mountain. He had indeed arrived at the Spirited Mountain. However, he did not know whether Vairocana was still cultivating on the Spirited Mountain. What's that? After everyone walked past the stone tablet, Lu Shihua suddenly pointed to a place behind the stone tablet and said with some panic. Guhan looked at where Lu Shihua was pointing and found that there was a skeleton sitting behind the stone tablet. This skeleton was wearing a light yellow kasaya. The kasaya itself seemed to be an incredible treasure. Even at this time, it was still as clean as new and emitted a dazzling light. However, the owner of the kasaya had already become a skeleton. Seeing Lu Shihua being a little frightened by the skeleton, Guhan could not help but smile in his heart. One should know that not long ago, Lu Shihua was just a skeleton. Even the bones of a skeleton were not complete. He looked much more terrifying than this skeleton. Hey, there's also a skeleton here. Song Yifei quickly found another skeleton directly opposite the skeleton. Both skeletons were sitting cross-legged on the ground. From the position of the two skeletons, it seemed that they were guarding the main road to the reception area. This is the welcoming monk of the Spirited Mountain. Celestial Extinguished Sword and Celestial Extermination Sword carefully observed the two skeletons and said, Look at the skull of this skeleton. There are 3 ring scars on it. The monks of the Spirited Mountain are divided into 9 classes according to the number of ring scars on their heads. The 3rd class of monks is the welcoming monk of the mountain gate. Because they're guarding the gate, they are very proud, so they can wear the purple gold kasaya that only bodhisattvas can wear. Otherwise, even the ordinary Vajra Arhat can only wear a yellow monk's robe. Isn't this spiritual mountain a little too prideful? Song Yifei was a little shocked by what Celestial Extermination Sword said. I remember that the remaining books said that the monks are the most proud. Was this monk the one who cared the least about money and treasures in the world, and the least about face? Was it a simple religion? Why would they do such a stupid thing? Who told you that the monks don't care about money and treasures? Don't they care about their face? Celestial Extermination Sword rolled its eyes at Song Yifei and said, if the monks don't care about money and treasures, why would they put a merit box and let people donate money and so on? If the monks don't care about their face, why would they make a golden Buddha statue? And it has to be made of pure gold. Let me tell you, the monks in this world are the most hypocritical. They obviously covet the best things in the world, but they still advise others not to covet these things. This is the most hypocritical and despicable thing. Celestial Extermination Sword. Be careful with your words. Celestial Extermination Sword's words made Celestial Extermination Sword frown. Is there a need to be careful with my words? Celestial Extermination Sword looked at its sister with dissatisfaction and said, of course, we don't know whether the 2 saints of the Western Paradise are dead or alive. If they're still alive like Lord Taishang Laojun, then you should be careful that the 2 of them will find you and pay you back for what you said today. Celestial Extermination Sword said lightly. That's enough. I won't say anything. Celestial Extermination Sword stuck out its tongue and actually admitted defeat. After that, everyone walked along the main road of the Spirited Mountain. The main road of the Spirited Mountain was extremely long. They walked for hundreds of kilometers, but they still didn't reach 1/4 of the height. What made Gahan even more surprised was that there were skeletons sitting on the ground everywhere on the Spirited Mountain. If someone who didn't know the details came here and saw everything in front of them, they would only think that this was some kind of hell on earth. How would they know that this was actually the legendary Western Paradise, the Spirited Mountain Great Thunder Sound Temple with great freedom and happiness? Chapter 1487. TSK, what happened here? If Zhuanti and Jean were to come back and see their beloved Spirited Mountain in such a state, they would probably be so angry that they would vomit blood. Along the way, Gohan and the others saw at least thousands of corpses of monks. These were just the corpses that appeared on the 2 sides of the road. In the temples and forests further away, there were probably more corpses of monks. A rough estimate showed that there were more than 1 million corpses on Spirited Mountain. After understanding this point, the Extinguished Immortal Sword couldn't help but say what it said above. This was indeed the truth. Spirited Mountain was a holy land of Buddhism built by Zhuanti and Jian after many years of painstaking effort. Every monk in it was a devout believer of Buddhism and could be said to be a pillar of strength. In the end, all these monks died in Spirited Mountain. While the Celestial Slashing Sword was mocking him, it could not help but feel a little fearful. Who was it that had the ability to kill all the monks on Spirited Mountain? Gahan, did you humans do this back then? During the Battle of Alps? Extinguished Immortal Sword poked Gohan's shoulder and asked. Absolutely not. Gohan denied with certainty. Back then, humans were in a state of defense all the time. These bold donkeys on Spirited Mountain attacked hysterically. How could we humans have the ability to fight our way to Spirited Mountain? I can guarantee that no human has ever entered Spirited Mountain, let alone killed all the monks on Spirited Mountain. That's strange. Now that Spirited Mountain has hidden in a hidden place like the dimensional space, what kind of deity killed all these monks? Celestial Extinguishing Sword said with a strange expression on his face. It's not that simple. Extinguished Immortal Sword carefully examined the corpses of these monks and said, although these monks' skin and flesh are gone, Judging from their bones, they definitely did not resist before they died. They died in a rather peaceful and even somewhat happy situation. The simplest point is that if they really died from an enemy invasion, unless this enemy could kill all the monks overnight, these monks' corpses would not be so naturally distributed in different places on Spirited Mountain. They were obviously killed in their daily lives. Well, I have another question. If this Yuan Ko died in the dimensional space, wouldn't his corpse be absorbed by the dimensional whirlpool? On Earth, the dead Yuan Ko can't even be found with a bit of bone powder, Song Yifei said doubtfully. Gohan hesitated. Gohan was not too sure about this because Gohan had never killed any Yuan Ko in the dimensional space. And that Xiaoling or Lu Shihua also began to analyze. That Xiaoling bought things for Vairocana to cultivate a few years ago, so he should be here often. And these corpses look at least 100 years old. It's impossible for Xiaoling not to see these corpses. Obviously, he has long been used to the existence of these corpses, and that Vairocana must still be alive. That's right. The answers to all the questions are in the Great Lane Temple. As long as we enter the Great Lane Temple and find Vairocana, we should be able to find some answers. I don't believe that this desolate level Yuan Ko died so easily. Gohan's last sentence ended everyone's discussion. Everyone began to silently walk toward the Great Lane Temple at the top of the mountain. After walking for about a day, everyone finally passed the cloud soaring crossing. Once they came out of the cloud soaring crossing, the gate of the Great Lane Temple appeared in front of everyone. This place is really declining. Just like the corpses they saw on the mountain road, the once magnificent and extraordinary Great Lane Temple had actually become quiet. Although the building was still towering, the stubborn weeds that grew in the cracks of the building showed that this place had long been in decline. If it wasn't for the Great Lane Temple signboard, no one would believe that this was a Buddhist holy land and the place where Buddha resided. Strange, this Great Lane Temple is a building enveloped by the power of will. How can ordinary weeds grow here? This is unbelievable. The Celestial Extinguished Sword looked at the weeds on the ground and said in disbelief. Clearly, in the Celestial Extinguished Sword's subconscious, even the appearance of a weed in the Great Lane Temple was unimaginable. Let's go in and take a look. Gohan didn't care about the weeds and led everyone directly into the Great Lane Temple. The Great Lane Temple was very magnificent, and the complexity was even greater than the palace. There were all kinds of Buddhist halls and nunneries everywhere. If it wasn't for the Celestial Extinguished Sword and the Celestial Extinguished Sword's familiarity with the Great Lane Temple, they might not have been able to find the Great Buddha's Hall, which was also the place where Mahavairocana sat. We're here. This is the Great Buddha's Hall of the Great Buddha's Hall. After a few turns, they finally arrived at an ordinary-looking hall. This hall seemed to be no different from the other halls around it. If it wasn't for the Celestial Extinguished Sword telling them that this was the core of the Great Buddha's Hall of the Great Buddha's Hall, they would definitely not believe it. Do you guys think that Mahavairocana is already dead? After all, there's skeletons everywhere in this spirited mountain. There won't be many skeletons like Mahavairocana, Song Yifei said wickedly. Indeed, even if Mahavairocana isn't dead, he must still be seriously injured. With so many of us suddenly barging in, Mahavairocana might have secretly hidden himself. I think it'll be very difficult for us to find him, the Celestial Extinguished Sword said. Why do you two have so much nonsense to say? Won't we know once we go in and have a look? Gohan glared at the two guys, and then directly pushed open the dusty door of the Great Buddha's Hall. Then, a melodious sound of a wooden fish floated out from the depths of the Great Buddha's Hall and entered everyone's ears. There's someone in the Great Buddha's Hall. Everyone was shocked, and at this time, the sound of the wooden fish stopped abruptly. A somewhat deep voice said, "Those who come from afar are guests. Since you have come to my small spirited mountain, why don't you come in and have a chat?" This is the voice of Mahavairocana. This is the voice of Mahavairocana. Yes, I will never forget this voice for the rest of my life. The Celestial Extinguished Sword said immediately, It seemed that Mahavarokana was indeed still alive. This also made Gahan heave a sigh of relief. If Mahavarokana was dead, where could Guhan find someone to repair the celestial invading sword? Chapter 1488. Although there were few statues or portraits of Vairocana Buddha in the human world, there were many images of Vairocana Buddha in other dimensional worlds. Countless portraits and sculptures told people that Vairocana Buddha was a fat monk with big ears, a sincere body, a serene face, and a dozen rows of bulges on his head. He always had a kind smile on his face. However, when people saw Vairocana Buddha with their own eyes, they were surprised to find that the legendary master of Buddhism was actually a skinny old man. He was so skinny that he looked like a bag of bones. He didn't look fat at all. If someone said that this guy was Vairocana, no one would be willing to believe it at first glance. Please sit on the ground. I'm sorry I can't move, so I can't entertain you, Vairocana Buddha said faintly. At this time, Song Yifei also noticed that Vairocana Buddha was holding a string of Buddha beads in his hand. He immediately whispered to Gahan, "This string of Buddha beads is the one I sold to Qiao Linger. I can't be wrong." Vairocana Buddha seemed to have heard Song Yifei's words. He frowned and said, "Since you came to my spirited mountain from Qiao Linger's place, but Linger didn't come with you, he must have died in your hands." Clang! Hearing Vairocana's words, everyone immediately entered a state of alert, their weapons aimed at Vairocana. As long as Vairocana Buddha showed any signs of preparing to attack, their attacks would fall on Vairocana Buddha without hesitation. Benefactors, there's no need to panic. Ling Er's death is nothing more than returning to the real Western Pure Land of ultimate bliss. Compared to me, Ling Er can be considered to be quite lucky. Mahavarokana said, "I didn't expect you to be so open-minded. Everyone, put away your weapons. We're not here to fight." Gahan nodded to everyone. Then, everyone put away their weapons. The Mahavira Buddha's hall regained some peace. "You must be joking. The world is so complicated. Even I have a lot of things that I can't get over. If I could really let go of everything, I wouldn't have fallen to this state today." Suddenly, Mahavarokana let out a carefree laugh as a divine radiance appeared. At this moment, Mahavarokana had really recovered some of the bearing of a Buddha. "Buddha, have you thought it through now?" Gahan did not care about the dust that had accumulated on the ground. He sat down and looked at Vairocana. "I've thought through some things, that's all." Mahavarokana waved his shriveled bone-like right hand, which was still in a lotus shape, and said, "Benefactor, since you've come here, just tell me your purpose." "All right, then I'll be straightforward." Gahan nodded. He took out his immortal trapping sword and said, "I only came here with one request. I hope that Ancestral Buddha can use your chaos force to repair my immortal trapping sword. I would be extremely grateful. In the future, as long as Buddha doesn't do anything harmful to us humans, I can guarantee that I won't disturb Buddha's peace. At the same time, I will also forbid others from disturbing Buddha's peace. The grudges between us humans and the spirited mountain will be written off. Is that all right with you, Ancestral Buddha?" After Gahan said this, Lu Shihua looked at Gahan in astonishment. In the Battle of the Alps, more than half of the sword-bearers had died. They had never suffered such a great loss before. Apart from the appearance of the 12 grand shamans and the early days of the Great Calamity when they were at the mercy of others, Mahavarokana was a name that had never changed on the humans' wanted list. He had even occupied the first place for 300 years. Even though his name had been replaced by another Yuan Ko, Mahavarokana's name remained in second place. He was an existence that everyone wanted to kill. Gahan had actually written off the grudges between humans and Mahavarokana with just a few words. From this, it could be seen that Gahan had unavoidably used the suffering of humans as a bargaining chip. Taking a step back, did Gahan really have the ability to make such a promise on behalf of humans? Thinking of this, Lu Shihua could not help but fall silent. She felt that her master had made a mistake and should not have made such a promise. However, she did not dare to reprimand her master either. She could only lower her head in silence. Sound great. The ancestral Buddha smiled faintly. However, this isn't what I want. Why don't we change the condition? What condition? Gahan narrowed his eyes. If you can send me back to the Pure Land, I will help you repair the immortal trapping sword. Mahavarokana said something that left even Guhan at a loss. There were two possible answers to sending Mahavarokana back to the Pure Land. One was to send Mahavarokana back to the Western Pure Land. However, the problem was that the Spirited Mountain was already the Western Pure Land. How could there be a Western Pure Land to send Mahavarokana back to? The second was the traditional answer to return to the Pure Land, which was to kill Mahavarokana. That was even stranger. Why would someone use killing him as a condition for a deal? Isn't this the Western Pure Land? Gahan suddenly said after thinking for a while. There are bones everywhere here. This is not the Western Pure Land. Then how should I send Ancestral Buddha to the Western Pure Land? One sword will suffice. Benefactor, you are also happy. Mahavarokana laughed. This Mahavarokana wanted Gahan to kill him. In that case, please help me repair the immortal trapping sword first, and I will send you on your way. No, Benefactor, send me back to the Pure Land first, and I will help you. F***CK. You stinky monk, stinky Yuanko, are you out of your mind? If we kill you, where can you go to help us? Hearing the conversation between Gahan and Mahavarokana, Song Yifei was so angry that his eyebrows were raised. This was the funniest joke in the world, not to mention asking others to kill him. If he really killed Gahan first, why would they come and find him? That's not it, don't be rude. Gahan glared at Song Yifei, and Song Yifei shrank back unwillingly. Gahan stared at Mahavarokana for a long time before saying, Ancestral Buddha, I, Gahan, am not a smart person, and I don't want to beat around the bush with you. If you need me to do anything, just tell me. As long as I think I can do it, I will do it. Sigh. Benefactor, you still lack some wisdom. Mahavarokana sighed slightly, and then a happy expression appeared on his face. However, your remaining wisdom is indeed enough to be a monk. If you are willing, I am willing to accept you as a disciple on behalf of my master, and we can be a pair of Buddhist brothers. How about that? What the hell? Everyone was stunned. It was not that they were not smart enough, but the world was changing too fast. Chapter 1489. You want me to be a monk? Gahan looked at Vairocana with a playful gaze. Then, he nodded and smiled, ignoring the opposing gazes of the women around him. That's fine too. As long as you can help me repair the immortal trapping sword, I'll become a monk. No, Benefactor, you have to be a monk first. Only then can I save the immortal trapping sword. Vairocana shook his head and said resolutely, Really? Gahan's expression changed slightly. Didn't the Buddha say that I would only be willing to repair my sword lady after I kill him? Why did you change your mind now? Did I change my mind? Vairocana smiled. I have never changed my words. This is the same thing. Little friend, you just have to enter my Buddhism. Gahan, this guy is just fooling you. Don't fall for it. Song Yifei tugged at Gahan's sleeve and said nervously. Although monks were rare after the Great Calamity, Song Yifei had a general understanding of some of the rules of Buddhism. In particular, she knew that one of the rules of Buddhism was that monks were not allowed to eat meat, marry, and have children. Therefore, Song Yifei was very nervous. She was afraid that Gahan would agree to Vairocana's request and become a monk. Don't panic, Benefactor. Buddhism did have such rules in the past. However, after the Celestial Empire, the rules of Buddhism have changed. According to the rules of the Celestial Empire, monks are also allowed to eat meat, marry, and have children. These are all allowed. Benefactor, you don't have to worry about these trivial matters. Vairocana laughed loudly. What the hell is this? Song Yifei looked at Gahan in confusion. Gahan nodded. After living in another dimension for 5 years, Gahan had a very good understanding of things before the Great Calamity. Before the Celestial Empire, monks indeed had many rules. They were definitely not allowed to marry and have children. However, in the Celestial Empire, these rules were completely shattered like dregs in front of the Celestial Empire. The monks of the Celestial Empire are more like a profession. Not only can they eat meat, but they can also kill. Even marrying and having children is in line with the law. There were quite a number of people who chanted Amitabha Buddha in front of them. A fat and big-eared monk had his own wife and children behind him. It was very beautiful. Otherwise, how could monks have become such a popular profession during the Celestial Empire? Some famous monasteries even insisted on Buddhist postgraduates and doctorates. With a lower educational background, you wouldn't even have the qualifications to look at Buddha. All right, I promise you. Gohan thought about it and felt that he had no other choice but to agree to Vairocana's conditions. The entire Spirit Mountain was completely wiped out, and Great Rulai himself was also half dead. He even looked like he was seeking death. Facing such an opponent, Gohan really couldn't think of a way to make him take the initiative to repair his immortal trapping sword. Helpless, he could only agree. It was just being a monk. It wasn't a big deal. Gohan didn't care about such things. All right, good, all right. Mahavarokana said the word good 3 times in a row before sighing. The heavens haven't destroyed my Buddhism. With Junior Martial Brother Gohan joining my Buddhism won't be destroyed. Junior Martial Brother, please forgive me for my lack of consideration. Most of the spiritual mountain has withered, and I'm taking in a disciple on behalf of my master. Junior Martial Brother Gohan's status is revered, so I should have set up the Vajra Arhut Buddhist light array, and at the same time invited the big shots of the 3 realms of man, immortal, and demon to congratulate you and share in this grand event. It's a pity that I don't have the strength to do so. I can't even leave this place, so I can only simplify everything. Vairocana said to Gohan in shame. That's perfect. Gohan heaved a sigh of relief. If he really set up such a grand event, the ceremony would probably take at least 10 days to half a month. Gohan didn't have that much time to wait for the ceremony. It was better to do it as soon as possible so that Vairocana could repair the immortal entrapment sword for him as soon as possible. Vairocana nodded. Before anyone could react, he suddenly inserted his right hand into his chest and pulled out a relic that shone with Buddhist light. As the relic left his body, Vairocana's entire body became dispirited. At the same time, his skin and muscles began to contract rapidly, and he soon became like a mummy. Junior Martial Brother, keep this sage relic well. Everything you want is in this sage relic. Vairocana said to Gohan in his final extremely withered voice. At this moment, Vairocana's voice had become as coarse and deep as an ancient piano that hadn't been repaired for a long time. It was obvious that he didn't have much time left. Sage relic? Gohan was shocked. Since this relic dared to name itself as a sage, didn't that mean that this relic was left behind by a sage? Senior Martial Brother, I still have something to ask you. This sage relic is... Gohan was about to ask Vairocana for an explanation, but Vairocana's skeleton collapsed in an instant, leaving only a pale human skin on the praying mat. The entire spirited mountain suddenly began to shake violently, and the Tempest Temple, which was an extremely majestic building, began to gradually collapse. Junior Martial Brother, remember, you must not be forced by emotions. You must kill when you need to, and you must not be wrong. A melodious voice that sounded like a great bell suddenly floated in the hall. This was probably Vairocana's last words. However, after hearing this, Gohan's expression became extremely ugly. The meaning of this sentence was not difficult to understand, but once it was understood, anyone's expression would probably become as ugly as Gohan's. The spirited mountain is about to be destroyed. Let's leave immediately. Otherwise, once the dimensional mark breaks, we will have no way to return. In just a second, Gohan put away all his previous thoughts and jumped down from the spirited mountain with Song Yifei, Lu Shihua, and his sword ladies. They found the dimensional mark that they came from and sprinted along it. When Gohan finally returned to the dimension wall in the real world, the colored mark line had also completely disappeared. This also meant that the spirited mountain on the other side of the mark line had completely collapsed. Damn it, this Vairocana actually deceived us, and tricked Gohan into becoming a monk to trouble the Son of God. In the end, the immortal entrapping sword still wasn't repaired. This big liar, we suffered a huge loss. After Song Yifei heaved a sigh of relief when he set foot on Earth again, he couldn't help but start cursing. Lu Shihua was not as happy as Song Yifei. Instead, he looked at his master very worriedly, for fear that his master was in a bad mood after being deceived by Vairocana. He was already prepared to comfort his master at any time. Stop cursing. The other party is dead after all. Let's respect the dead. Gohan sighed and looked at the worried Lu Shihua behind him. Don't worry about Master. Master won't take such a small matter to heart. Yes. Lu Shihua nodded obediently. At the same time, Gohan suddenly took out a white leather case from his dimensional pocket. After looking at it for a while, he let out a long sigh and threw it into Song Yifei's hands. He said to Song Yifei, "Dig a hole and bury him." "Oh." Song Yifei responded subconsciously. He took the white leather case and looked at it in his hand. Then, he screamed and threw the leather case on the ground. He was so scared that he was trembling. This was a very rare thing. Song Yifei was an immortal sword wielder, after all, and yet he was scared to this extent by a leather sheath. Lu Shihua curiously came over to take a look. He was also shocked. Looking at the eyes, nose, and mouth on the leather case, Lu Shihua immediately realized what was going on. This was not a leather case. It was clearly a piece of human skin. However, Lu Shihua had been on the battlefield for a long time and had seen all kinds of tragic scenes. A piece of human skin was not enough to completely break Lu Shihua down. Only someone like Song Yifei, who was a celestial sword tier sword wielder but had pitifully little actual combat experience, would be frightened by a piece of human skin. At the same time, Lu Shihua also noticed that there were 12 black bumps on the head of this human skin. His heart skipped a beat, and he asked Gohan in disbelief, "Master, is this the skin of Vairocana?" "Yes, this is the skin of my cheap senior brother Vairocana." Gohan nodded and said with a gloomy expression, "UB** star Gohan, why did you bring your senior brother's skin back? Wouldn't it be better to let him stay quietly in the dimensional space?" Song Yifei, who had calmed down, could not help but curse. Song Yifei also remembered that when Vairocana died, although his bones, flesh, and everything else had dissipated, only this human skin was left. He did not expect that Gohan would bring it back. There's more than one piece of human skin. Gohan smiled nonchalantly. Suddenly, he threw out more than 10 bones from his dimensional pocket and piled them up with Vairocana's human skin. He gestured for Song Yifei to dig a hole and bury it together. "Enough, Gohan, what are you doing?" Song Yifei felt like she was going crazy. How could he bring such things back? Song Yifei thought that Gohan was crazy, but Lu Shihua knew that her master was not crazy, and he would never do anything without a goal. Since Gohan had brought back Vairocana's human skin and these bones, there must be a deeper meaning to it. At this time, Lu Shihua, who had been a leader for 20 years, was already considered a top wise person. She thought for a while and immediately had a shocked expression on her face. She asked Gohan in disbelief, "Master, could it be that Vairocana and the monks on Spirited Mountain are all?" "Yes." Gohan looked at Lu Shihua and nodded. Then, he shook his head and sighed a few times. "I didn't expect you to see it too. Sigh, there's so many changes in this world. I didn't expect it. Chapter 1490. What kind of riddle are the two of you talking about? Don't exclude me, okay? Seeing that Lu Shihua and Gohan seemed to have understood the meaning behind it, Song Yifei still felt confused. It was as if she had returned to the time when Gohan and Liuyan Ling were whispering to each other in Chanyang Mountain. Suddenly, a sour grievance surged in her heart as she said resentfully, "Shihua, explain it to Yifei. Shihua, explain it to Yifei. Master is tired. Master wants to take a nap." Gohan waved his hand and took out a tent from his dimensional pocket. He then went to sleep in the tent. "You!" Song Yifei suddenly felt angry. Lu Shihua hurriedly pulled Song Yifei's hand and whispered to her, "Miss Yifei, don't blame Master anymore. Master is not in a good mood now. Don't add oil to the fire." Why is he in a bad mood? He's the one who became a monk, and he's also the one who brought his senior brother's people back. I think he's in a good mood. Song Yifei rolled his eyes at Lu Shihua, but he was just venting. Song Yifei also knew that Guhan hadn't slept for 3 days and 3 nights, and he was really tired. After venting the dissatisfaction in her heart, Song Yifei took the initiative to pull Lu Shihua's sleeve and asked, "Good Shihua, tell me, what's going on with this human skin? Why did Gahan bring this human skin and these bones back?" "Because Master wants to see if this human skin and bones will be brought back by the dimensional vortex," Song Yifei said with her head lowered. "What's there to see? Since Yuan Ko is dead, his things will naturally be absorbed by the dimensional vortex. This..." Before Song Yifei could finish speaking, she saw the human skin at her feet. Her heart was in turmoil. At the same time, she completely understood why Gahan had brought this human skin and bones back. Just as Song Yifei had said, as long as it was a Yuanko, the person's skin and bones would be absorbed by the dimensional vortex. Previously, because the bones and human skin were in the dimensional space, Guhan didn't know if the dimensional vortex would appear in the dimensional space. Therefore, even if the bones had been intact on Mount Numinous for hundreds of years, Guhan couldn't be sure what had happened. However, when the skin and bones were brought back to the real world, today's guess was confirmed. Since the skin and bones were not absorbed by the dimensional vortex, there was only one explanation. The owner of the skin was Vairocana, and the remains of the monks in the spirited mountain were not Yuanko, but native creatures of this world. That's right, Vairocana wasn't Yuanko, but a native of this world. Once this shocking discovery was announced, it would immediately cause the entire history of mankind to be rewritten. This was simply a shocking fact. However, this fact was indeed shocking at first, but on second thought, it didn't seem impossible. After all, there was such an example in the past, and that was our classmate Ing Zheng. As a native of the witch tribe, he successfully lived for more than 3,000 years by constantly being reborn as a baby. He stayed in this era and once again became the leader of the human race. In that case, it seemed natural that Vairocana and Monk Numinous Mountain, who were far stronger than Ing Zheng, could also live from ancient times to the present day. However, there were still many doubtful points. If Vairocana and even the entire Spirited Mountain were native creatures, why did they get involved with Yuan Ko? Moreover, they claimed to be Yuan Ko from the beginning and never mentioned anything about being native creatures. Moreover, before the Spirited Mountain disappeared, humans had fought many times with the forces of the Spirited Mountain. The battle in the Alps was initiated by Vairocana, and the entire Spirited Mountain acted together. The contact between humans and the Spirited Mountain could be said to be countless. At that time, the Yuan Ko of the Spirited Mountain was the real Yuan Ko. His dead body would be absorbed by the dimensional vortex, and his body was filled with the dimensional force that belonged to Yuan Ko. There was absolutely no sign of him being a native creature. How did he become a native creature now? Also, if the Spirited Mountain was really a native creature, it should have been the most natural ally of humans. Even if the Spirited Mountain did not care about the incense offerings that humans had offered for thousands of years, just the fact that everyone was a native creature of Earth was enough for them to walk together and depend on each other. However, in the end, the Spirited Mountain actually became humanity's greatest opponent and colluded with Yuan Ko, almost completely destroying humanity. How could they look like a natural ally? These 3 points alone were enough for Song Yifei to be filled with doubts about the Spirited Mountain being a native creature of humans. However, there was another thing that lingered in Song Yifei's mind. If the Spirited Mountain was really a native of Earth, were the branches of the heavenly courts, mountain paradise, and other native religions also native creatures of Earth? At the thought of this, Song Yifei felt a headache coming on. He was unwilling to continue thinking and could only look at Gahan's tent for help, hoping that when Gahan walked out of the tent, he would be able to resolve his doubts. Song Yifei initially thought that Gahan would be able to walk out of the tent after one night. In fact, Song Yifei and Lu Shihua had been waiting for 15 days, but Guhan was still in the tent. If Lu Shihua and Song Yifei hadn't been able to clearly sense Gu Han's aura in the tent and secretly open the door of the tent, they would have thought that Gu Han was indeed meditating in the tent, or they would have thought that Gu Han had disappeared again. Just when Song Yifei and Lu Shihua were considering whether they should forcefully wake Gu Han up, Gu Han's tent finally opened by itself, and Gu Han slowly walked out of the tent. However, Gu Han had clearly rested for 15 days, but when he came out, his footsteps were still weak, his skin was loose, and his eyes were red and swollen. He did not look like he had slept for 15 days, but more like he had been working nonstop for 15 days. Gu Han, what happened to you? Master, are you okay? Song Yifei and Lu Shihua asked with concern at the same time, but Gu Han did not answer. Instead, he glanced back and forth between Lu Shihua and Song Yifei with hesitation. He took a deep breath and asked, Yifei, are you willing to become a husband and wife with me? Song Yifei was shocked, and he did not dare to look at Gu Han's eyes. He only dared to blink at Lu Shihua. But Lu Shihua also looked confused, indicating that he had no idea that his master would suddenly say such a thing. Gu Han, are you crazy? Or should I say that you are not wrong? What about the relationship between a husband and wife? You won't kiss or hold hands. Song Yifei hesitated and said incoherently, I am not crazy. The relationship between a husband and wife is the relationship between a husband and wife in your imagination, Gu Han said calmly. Song Yifei was completely silent, and after a long time, he asked faintly, I can give you anything, but can you give me a reason? To save the lives of all humans. Is this reason enough? Gu Han asked in a very dry tone. Is this the reason? Of course it's enough. Although Song Yifei said that, he did not sound happy at all. Sacrificing his own body for the sake of the human race. This reason sounded so ridiculous. Although Song Yifei knew that what Gu Han said was most likely not a lie, but the truth. Although Song Yifei was willing to give himself to Gu Han 1,000 times over in his heart. But using such a reason to convince himself, Song Yifei felt as if thousands of streams of bitterness flowed through his heart. Master, let me do it. Just when Song Yifei was hesitating, Lu Shihua, who was silent with his head down, suddenly jumped out and recommended himself to Gu Han. Master, let me do it. If it's just for sex, Miss Yifei and I are the same. Since it's to save humans, let me do it. After saying that, Lu Shihua felt his body soften, and all the power that suddenly appeared just now disappeared in an instant. Only the heavens knew how much courage Lu Shihua had to expend to make such a shocking move. Lu Shihua knew better than anyone else that because of their relationship as master and disciple, he was actually the furthest one, even though he seemed to be the closest to his master. Before his rebirth, Lu Shihua was still ignorant about the relationship between him and his master. In his heart, as long as he could stay with his master for the rest of his life, even if they were master and disciple for the rest of his life, it would be a very happy thing. Lu Shihua had never thought about further development. However, after his rebirth, Lu Shihua suddenly understood a lot of things. She did not want to be an obedient disciple anymore, or rather, apart from the position of disciple, she wanted to go one step further and take both the position of disciple and lover. Especially when Gu Han made that promise to Lu Shihua in front of the sickbed. This fiery desire in Lu Shihua's heart became more and more intense. Shihuayu. Gu Han looked helplessly at his disciple, who had obviously mustered up his entire life's worth of courage to jump out. Gu Han could roughly guess Lu Shihua's thoughts with just a little bit of thought. Gu Han might know better than Lu Shihua how much courage his disciple had to put in to make such a decision. Damn it, what a good opportunity, but Lu Shihua took it first. At this time, Song Yifei suddenly woke up from his dream. In front of a competitor who suddenly appeared, all the little girl thoughts just now disappeared without a trace in an instant. What a joke. Gu Han took the initiative to propose to do it with him, and this was his best opportunity. He should go all out and settle the relationship first, and the other things could be discussed later. Wasn't this the scene that he had been dreaming about for 20 years? Wasn't there such a saying that if a person ate 2 steam buns, they would dislike the taste of one steamed bun. However, if two people ate one steamed bun, then the steamed bun would be as delicious as a delicacy. Moreover, Song Yifei had been looking forward to this steamed bun for 20 years. Let me do it. It was originally mine. Song Yifei walked firmly in front of Guhan, pushed Lu Shihua aside, and said. Chapter 1491. What are you arguing about? Seeing that Song Yifei and Lu Shihua were about to fight, Guhan was speechless. In fact, anyone with a brain would know that Guhan should not have made such a request at this time. If Guhan was really in a hurry for women, he could have secretly done it with Song Yifei at night. There was no need for him to make such a request in the day. However, Guhan had no choice. If Guhan did not do this, Guhan might not even live for 20 minutes. Guhan smiled bitterly as he looked at Song Yifei and Lu Shihua glaring at each other. I'm afraid this Vairocana is trying to kill me. That day, Guhan was really tired and went to bed early. After waking up, he wanted to return to Yuzhong City directly. However, he thought about how he had gone all the way to find Vairocana, only to find that he was a native and nothing else. The celestial trapping sword still looked like an ancient sword. This made Guhan a little unhappy. Guhan thought about it carefully and felt that Vairocana would not speak without thinking. His words before he died had a deep meaning. Moreover, from the fact that he insisted on accepting a disciple on behalf of his master and made him his junior brother, Vairocana should be hiding a deep plan in his heart. The most likely thing for this plan was the sage relic that Vairocana had given to him before he died. Therefore, Guhan immediately took out the sage relic. However, no matter how he looked at it, he could not see any clues. It was like an ordinary stone that only glowed. He recalled that Mingyuan Jindi had once said that the foundation of a sage was on the consciousness fragment. Therefore, Guhan suddenly wondered if the sage relic could also be activated by the consciousness fragment. Therefore, Guhan separated a fragment of his consciousness and quietly seeped into the sage relic. Just as Guhan had guessed, when Guhan's consciousness fragment touched the sage relic actually turned into a ray of light and directly fused with Guhan's consciousness fragment. At the same time, a large wave of memories entered Guhan's mind through the fragments of consciousness, causing Guhan to fall into a deep slumber once again. It was only after 10 days that Guhan had completely absorbed all the memories in the saint's relic that he found out the ins and outs of everything. He even knew how this damned world had been formed and how the great calamity had occurred. It turned out that this sage's relic, just like its name, had indeed come from a sage. Moreover, it was the most powerful sage in the legends, the guide sage. After Pangu created the world, apart from Saint Hongjun, 6 other saints were born. They were Taishang Lao Jun, Tongtian sect leader, primordial lord of heaven, Jain sage, Juni sage, and Lady Nowo. Among them, the guide sage and Taishang Lao Jun were the strongest, second only to Hongjun, while Lady Nowo was the weakest. Of course, even if it was the weakest sage, Lady Nowo could still crush all the other opponents and was invincible below the sage level. After the world went through a few great calamities after the journey to the west during the Tang dynasty, the Jie sect completely declined and the Chan sect was plucked. Although Taoism did not lose anything, it did not gain anything either. Only the Buddhism of the 2 sages of the West benefited a lot from the many calamities. In the end, they even overstepped their boundaries and took over the faith of the entire Huaxia in one fell swoop, becoming the #1 religion in Huaxia, comparable to the Green sect and the White sect. During the Great Ming Dynasty, a human named Lu Bowen used the opportunity of the rotation of destiny to directly cut off the dragon vein of heaven and earth, completely separating the heavenly court from the human world. From then on, both the heavenly court and spirited mountain were directly exiled into the dimensional space and could no longer enter the main world. What he saw was that Huaxia had lost the protection of heaven and earth. As a result, it was successively invaded by the remnants of the Wu people's female Jinren and the enemy of the West. Huaxia suffered heavy losses, and peace was only restored when a genius of the generation was born. However, this genius of a generation was even more domineering than Lu Bowen back then. He directly turned all the immortals and demons into demons and suppressed them. As a result, Huaxia was completely free from the control of the immortals and demons. This genius of the generation had good intentions. He hoped that human beings could be independent from then on and control their own destiny with their own strength, no longer needing to be controlled by those so-called immortals and demons. However, he did not expect that it would become an opportunity for another guy lurking in the dark to stir up trouble. After the Battle of God's Investiture, the Jie sect suffered a great defeat. The 4 fairy-slaying swords of sect leader Tong Tian were even taken away by the 4 sages: Taishang Laojun, Yuan Shi Tianzuan, Jiayin Sage, and Juni Sage. Only the Qingpin sword was left with him. Sect leader Tong Tian was directly brought back to the Purple Cloud Palace by Hong Jun and put into indefinite confinement. It was said that sect leader Tong Tian would only be set free when he came to his senses. Being besieged by 4 people, sect leader Tong Tian was extremely angry. Of the tens of thousands of disciples he mentioned, most of them were directly beaten to death. The few who survived became the mounts of the immortals and bodhisattvas. It should be noted that these immortals and bodhisattvas used to call their disciples brothers and sisters. They used their junior brothers as their mounts and even castrated their junior brothers. Only 2 or 3 kittens and puppies survived. They trembled and hid in the Azure Palace, not daring to come out. Sect leader Tong Tian was originally a man of temperament. Even after he became a sage, his temperament did not change. Therefore, those who were to his liking or directly asked for their help were all accepted as disciples by sect leader Tong Tian. At the same time, he taught each of them well. He passed on his skills to each of them, and even passed on precious primordial spiritual treasures. This showed how much sect leader Tong Tian loved his disciples. When sect leader Tong Tian learned about what had happened to his disciples, he was filled with anger. He took the initiative to find his master, Hong Jun, hoping that his master could take care of his suffering disciples. He did not seek to rebuild the Jie school. He only hoped that those disciples could go to the Azure Palace and no longer be the mounts of those people. However, Ancestor Hong Jun only said that this was the mandate of heaven, which could not be violated. These disciples should have a tribulation in their lives. He asked sect leader Tong Tian to reflect on himself and not think about these unnecessary things. As a result, Ancestor Hong Jun's words completely infuriated sect leader Tong Tian. He directly pulled out the Qingping sword and stabbed it into Hong Jun's body. Then Hong Jun died. Ancestor Hong Jun had always been invincible in this world. Although the 6 sages were his disciples, none of them had the ability to defeat Ancestor Hong Jun. The sages even thought that Ancestor Hong Jun had surpassed the sage realm and reached another realm beyond the sage realm. Therefore, sect leader Tong Tian's sword was mostly to vent his anger. He never thought that he could defeat Ancestor Hong Jun. However, he never expected that Ancestor Hong Jun would be killed by sect leader Tong Tian. After killing his master, sect leader Tong Tian simply killed everyone in the Purple Cloud Palace. At the same time, he strictly blocked the news so that no one in the world knew that Ancestor Hong Jun had been killed. At this time, sect leader Tong Tian seemed to be completely controlled by something. He should have called back all his disciples and re-established the Jie school. However, he secretly lurked in the Purple Cloud Palace again. At the same time, he secretly sent 2 doppelgangers to the extreme west and the extreme south. One of them was named Jehovah, and the other was named Allah. They founded the Green School and the White School, respectively. At the same time, they gathered the local aborigines and developed the population. In the end, they managed to create 2 religions that could be compared with Buddhism. At the same time, with the help of the great wish brought by these 2 religions, sect leader Tong Tian's strength increased at an astonishing rate and reached a terrifying level. At the same time, sect leader Tong Tian began to secretly plot against the other sages. Therefore, he secretly bewitched Lu Bowen and taught him the method to cut off the power of heaven and earth. For the first time, Lu Bowen cut off the connection between heaven and earth, so that the gods in the sky lost the way to obtain the great wish from Huaxia. At the same time, he secretly supported the Nuzhen clan, so that the Nuzhen clan could conquer the world 300 years later and destroy the faith of the entire Yanhuan. At this time, the other sages also found that something was wrong. They immediately gathered in the Purple Cloud Palace, hoping that Ancestor Hongjun could come out and take charge of the situation. On the other hand, Grandmaster Tong Tian disguised himself as Hongjun Ancestor and deceived the other 5 saints into the Purple Cloud Palace. Then, the two sides began a chaotic battle. Because they had lost the support of the great wish of the world, the 5 sages were unable to defeat sect leader Tong Tian, even though they had the advantage in strength. Sect leader Tong Tian had also wrongly estimated his own strength. He had always thought that he could defeat the 5 saints, but in the end, he ended up in a stalemate. This stalemate lasted for 300 years, and it was time for the chi of heaven and earth to change. According to the original plan of the heavenly courts, they planned to support a certain bald man. However, in the end, a generation's pride appeared out of nowhere and actually reversed the fate set by the heavenly courts. He snatched the big one from the small, and a single spark could start a prairie fire. He forcibly killed everyone and achieved an unprecedented cause. After that, this pride completely destroyed the Confucian sect, the last faith of Yin Huang, and completely changed the world. From then on, the world was different. However, he did not expect that it secretly helped the Tong Tian sect leader. With the complete change of the world, the 5 sages also completely lost the support of the great wish of the world. The balance of strength began to reverse. 5 against 1, they were actually suppressed by sect leader Tong Tian. Seeing that sect leader Tong Tian was about to succeed in his revenge, the 5 sages had no choice but to take out their last trump card, which was the 4 immortal slaying swords that they obtained from sect leader Tong Tian. Chapter 1492. When sect leader Tong Tian saw the 5 sages take out the 4 immortal killing swords, he was not surprised. Instead, he was delighted. The sages thought that they had removed the imprint of sect leader Tong Tian in the 4 immortal killing swords, but they did not know that sect leader Tong Tian had also buried his consciousness fragments in the 4 immortal killing swords. When the 5 sages took the 4 immortal killing swords and were about to turn the situation around and enter sect leader Tong Tian's body, sect leader Tong Tian directly contacted the consciousness fragments buried in the 4 immortal killing swords. Through the consciousness fragments, he was prepared to erase the imprints of the 4 sages and regain control of the 4 immortal killing swords. When the sages saw this, they could not help but turn pale with fright. They could not defeat sect leader Tong Tian. If sect leader Tong Tian regained control of the 4 immortal killing swords, they would not want to live anymore. They would just wash their necks and let sect leader Tong Tian kill them. The sages also understood that the key to victory was in the 4 immortal killing swords. Whoever could hold the control of the 4 immortal killing swords in the end would be the final winner. Therefore, the 4 sages who directly controlled the 4 immortal killing swords followed suit. They also injected their own consciousness fragments into the 4 immortal killing swords, using their own consciousness fragments to compete with sect leader Tong Tian's consciousness fragments for control of the 4 immortal killing swords. As a result, the battle became a very funny one. It was a battle between the consciousness fragments of the sages. Because this battle was too important, no one could afford to lose this battle. The final result was that both sides kept injecting their own consciousness fragments into the bodies of the 4 immortal killing swords. As a result, there were more and more consciousness fragments in the bodies of the 4 immortal killing swords. The consciousness fragments belonging to different sides were squeezed together in the end. Under the urging of external forces, they kept attacking, but at the same time, they kept fusing. In the end, a situation that all the sages did not expect happened. The consciousness fragments that poured into the bodies of the four immortal killing swords finally fused together and turned into four real consciousnesses. Together with the original spiritual consciousness and memory of the four immortal killing swords, the result was the birth of four new personalities. I'm sure everyone has guessed that these are the first four sword maidens: slaying immortal sword, slashing immortal sword, trapping immortal sword, and slaughtering immortal sword. These four were the ancestors of all sword maidens, the first batch of sword maidens in this world, and also the most powerful. After the birth of the four sword ladies, the ownership of the four immortal killing swords naturally fell into the hands of the four sword ladies. It was no longer under the control of Tong Tian and the other five sages. And the battle also changed from fighting for the four immortal execution swords to persuading the four immortal execution swords. Whoever could convince the four immortal slaying swords to stand on their side would obtain the final victory. There was no detailed description of how he convinced the other party back then. However, Gahan knew that sect leader Tong Tian, who was the original owner of the four immortal killing swords, did not win in the end. Instead, it was the five sages who persuaded the four immortal killing swords to help them kill sect leader Tong Tian. Sect leader Tong Tian was completely enraged when he saw that his original weapon, his personal partner, had chosen to help the enemy in the end. Or rather, he had turned completely dark. After turning dark, sect leader Tong Tian once again unleashed an even more powerful force. Even with the help of the four immortal killing swords, the five sages were still in a stalemate with sect leader Tong Tian. They dared not harm the primary world during their battle, so they could only fight in the dimensional worlds. As a result, the aftermath of the battle directly broke through the dimensional walls of the dimensional worlds, allowing the creatures of the dimensional worlds to enter the primary world through the holes in the dimensional walls. This was also the reason why the first batch of Yuan Ko arrived. At the same time, this day was also the day the Great Apocalypse began. It is worth mentioning that when Yuan Ko first entered the primary world, there was actually a division between good and evil. Some of the Yuan Ko, who were born with murderous and sinful thoughts, naturally launched a monstrous massacre on humans. However, there were also some Yuan Ko who did not harm humans. Instead, they chose to help humans, such as Dangma Jojo and Misaka Mikoto. From the beginning, they stood on the side of humans and helped humans maintain the order of the primary world. This was also the reason why humans were able to protect the human race from extinction at the beginning of the Great Apocalypse, and even defend Yinjing City in the end. On the other hand, sect leader Tong Tian, who was fighting in the dimensional space, became stronger as the battle went on. As the human world was destroyed, the strength of the five great sages became weaker and weaker. Just as they were about to die under sect leader Tong Tian's sword, two unknown sword energies suddenly appeared. One sword energy helped sect leader Tong Tian, and the other sword energy helped the five sages. The sword energy that helped the five sages was obviously stronger than the sword energy that helped sect leader Tong Tian. The role of these two sword energies should not be underestimated. The balance of the battle was originally only a hair's breadth apart. Once one side received a little more help, the balance would completely tilt to one side. Moreover, in terms of strength, the sword energy that came to help was actually not weaker than Taishang Laojun and Saint Jane. As for the sword energy that helped sect leader Tong Tian, it was at most the power of Goddess Envaiwa. In the end, with the help of this sudden sword energy, the five sages completely suppressed sect leader Tong Tian. Just as they were about to kill or seal sect leader Tong Tian, sect leader Tong Tian chose to perish together with all of his opponents. All of his strength exploded in an instant. The five sages were caught off guard. The three sages, Saint Juni, Heavenly Primogenitor, and Goddess Envaiwa, were directly destroyed by the explosion and disappeared completely. The Qingping sword and the four immortal exterminating swords were all blown up like scrap metal. In the end, they returned to the main world and disappeared. Only Taishang Laojun and Saint Jane who were slightly stronger, survived. However, even if they survived, their physical bodies were destroyed. Only a part of their primordial spirit and consciousness fragments maintained their existence. They would probably need to rest for tens of millions of years to recover. Taishang Laojun and Saint Jiayin, who survived, were ready to clean up the mess. However, they were horrified to find that sect leader Tong Tian was actually not completely dead like them. His power had merged with the dimension wall of the entire dimensional world. Without the control of the main consciousness, he would instinctively open the barrier between the dimension wall and the main world from time to time, letting Yuan Ko enter the main world. Anyone who entered the main world through this barrier would be contaminated by the power of sect leader Tong Tian and become full of killing intent towards humans. This was also the origin of filth. To put it bluntly, each filth was actually a fragment of sect leader Tong Tian's consciousness. Sect leader Tong Tian was so powerful that he could even surpass sages. When the fragment of sect leader Tong Tian's consciousness was attached to Yuan Ko's body, it was no wonder that Yuan Ko completely lost his mind, was completely controlled by the filth, and wanted to kill all human beings. This filth even invaded the heavenly court, spirited mountain, and the dimensional space where all the indigenous deities lived. It directly contaminated these indigenous deities and turned them into existences like Yuan Ko. In the end, sect leader Tong Tian's primordial spirit was still alive and turned into a black crystal. This black crystal was no longer something that Taishang Laojun and Saint Jiayin, who had lost most of their power, could completely destroy. Seeing that the originally beautiful human world had fallen to such a state because of their battle back then, Taishang Laojun and the Saint of Reception felt extremely ashamed. Therefore, Taishang Laojun and the Saint of Reception decided to use the Sanzang Book of Changes together to calculate how the future would turn out. In the end, after spending their origin to calculate, Taishang Laojun and Saint Jiayin discovered that although the heavenly Tao had been completely destroyed, the great Tao of this world still existed. Moreover, as long as the great Tao still existed, the power that repaired the world would actively maintain the stability of the world. At the same time, an existence that could save the world would be born, which was the legendary Leveler. At the same time, the two big shots also learned that this was the greatest calamity since the creation of the main world. It was a calamity that no sages could escape from. If this calamity was quelled by the evaluator, this world would continue to exist for a long time and become an eternal world. There would be no need to worry about the destruction of the entire world. However, if the Leveler failed, the entire world would completely disappear. Not a single trace could be found, and no one would be able to survive. After figuring out these things, Taishang Laojun and Saint Jiayin decided to use the last of their power to pave the way for the Leveler that would be born in the future and make one last effort to save this world. After a discussion, Taishang Laojun decided to use the last of his power to turn into a zone that was completely isolated from time and space. He sealed the black crystal so that it could no longer directly affect the power that belonged to the Grand Master of Heaven that was scattered on the dimension wall. On the other hand, Saint Jiayin chose to do the same thing as the Grand Master of Heaven. He let all of his power dissipate and attached it to the dimension wall, forming the recovery mechanism of the dimension wall so that the dead Yuan Ko could return to their original dimensional world. That was because once the corpses of the Yuan Ko were completely left in the main world and could not return to their original dimensional world, the original dimensional world would gradually begin to collapse. In particular, if the protagonist of the original dimensional world died and could not return, the dimensional world would collapse directly. The entire world itself was constructed from the main world and countless derived dimensional worlds. Once the dimensional world disappeared, the main world itself would also be destroyed. Therefore, in order to maintain the existence of the main world, Saint Jiayin had no choice but to use his power to build the final recovery mechanism, which was the dimensional whirlpool, to ensure that the other dimensional worlds could continue to exist stably. At the same time, Saint Jiayin injected his last consciousness fragment, which was the saint's relic that Guhan had obtained, into Vairocana's body. However, because it was deeply controlled by filth, the power of the saint's relic was also very weak. Therefore, although the saint's relic had entered Vairocana's body, it did not change the fact that Vairocana had been defiled and turned into Yuan-Ko. This was also the reason why the spirited mountain and humans had been fighting nonstop for hundreds of years. It was not until the defeat in the Alps that the filth in Vairocana's body weakened greatly that the saint's relic took the opportunity to break through the seal of filth, allowing Vairocana to regain his rationality. At the same time, it told Vairocana everything. After understanding that all of his subordinates had been misunderstood and controlled, Vairocana made a shocking decision, which was to use his own power to kill all the monks who had been misunderstood and controlled. In other words, the corpses that Guhan and the rest saw on the spirited mountain were actually all killed by Vairocana himself. As Vairocana had originally controlled all the monks' lives, it was only a matter of seconds for him to kill them. This was also the reason why the corpses of the monks maintained a peaceful attitude before they died and did not resist at all. It was because their master had killed them. However, after killing all of his subordinates, the foundation and willpower of Vairocana's existence were completely destroyed. Vairocana could only rely on the last saint's relic to struggle at death's door and live in the spirited mountain for hundreds of years. According to the instructions in the saint's relic, he would wait for the stabilizer to appear and hand the saint's relic to the stabilizer. At the same time, the stabilizer would know everything that had happened in this world. After losing the power of the saint's relic, Vairocana no longer had anything to rely on to survive. In the end, he could only become a piece of human skin. Similarly, the existence of the spirited mountain depended on Vairocana's existence to begin with. Following Vairocana's death, the spirited mountain completely returned to nothingness. This was the source of everything, the reason for the birth of the great calamity. After obtaining this saint's relic, Guhan finally understood the whole story. 1,000 years later, the human race, who had gone through so much suffering and fought for 1,000 years in confusion, finally learned the truth of what had happened back then. It was just that the truth had come a little too late. After going through all the memories, Guhan could not help but sigh emotionally. Chapter 1493. Guhan had never expected that he would be able to find out the truth behind the apocalypse from this saint's relic. This truth appeared so abruptly that Guhan could not react for a moment, until he confirmed it again, and at the same time compared to the fragmented stories he heard from the four Zhuxian swords. The two were very consistent. It seemed like this was most likely the truth. Later, Guhan used the information in the saint's relic to confirm it with the four immortal exterminating swords. After learning that Guhan had grasped the entire truth through the saint's relic, the four immortal exterminating swords simply admitted that the reason for the apocalypse was indeed as the saint's relic had said. The truth of the apocalypse had been completely confirmed. Before this, Guhan had thought that he would never be able to figure out the truth behind the great apocalypse in his lifetime. After all, humans had spent 1,000 years trying to figure out the story behind it. However, on second thought, he realized that there was still a very crucial question that had not been answered in the saint's relic. The reason for the appearance of the sword ladies. The reason for the appearance of the first batch of sword ladies in the world was clear. It was the self-consciousness of the four immortal exterminating swords due to the entanglement of their respective consciousness fragments during the battle between sect leader Tong Tian and the other sages. However, what about the other sword ladies? How was the self-consciousness of the Qingping swordborn? How was the self-consciousness of the heavenly swordborn? As for the tens of thousands of natural sword ladies, how were their consciousnesses born? Guhan also asked the four immortal exterminating swords in his hands. In the end, the four immortal exterminating swords said that they did not know the reason behind it either. After being beaten back to the main world, the four immortal exterminating swords fell into a coma for more than 100 years. When they woke up again, the sword ladies had already spread all over the world. They were also confused about the reason for their appearance. Although there was no way to solve the mystery of the Sword Lady's appearance, it was already a huge gift for Gahan to obtain the truth of the Great Apocalypse. What made Gahan even more excited was that the Saint's relic contained the various grievances between the sages back then and the truth of the Great Apocalypse. Other than detailing the various grudges between the saints back then and the truth behind the Great Calamity, the sage relics also contained the most important cultivation techniques of the saints. Although Gohan was only a celestial sword-level sword wielder, Emperor Sword level was something that Gohan could easily obtain. As long as the celestial captive sword could be restored, Gohan could immediately ascend to the throne and become an Emperor Sword-level sword wielder. Therefore, the real obstacle in front of Gahan now was how to surpass the Emperor Sword-level sword wielder and become a sage. Everyone might think that Gahan was too greedy. Emperor Sword level was already the peak of humanity. Why would Gahan still want to pursue that so-called saint? It was not that Gahan wanted to become a sage. It was that Gahan had no choice but to become a sage. In other words, Gahan had to become a sage. Otherwise, this world would still be finished. After all, it was very likely that the Tongtian sect master would be resurrected soon. According to the sage relics, the Tongtian sect master's power was attached to the dimension wall and became the culprit of opening the dimension rift. The Tongtian sect master's consciousness fragments became the source of corruption. After that, the Tongtian sect master's primordial spirit was sealed by Taishang Laojun. Therefore, the Tongtian sect master's body was not dead. As long as the Tongtian sect master's primordial spirit could be resurrected, and at the same time, he could collect his own power and the corrupted consciousness fragments, then the Tongtian sect master could probably be resurrected. If the Tongtian sect master wanted to resurrect, the most important thing was the sealed primordial spirit. According to the sage relics, the thing that was used to seal the Tongtian sect master's primordial spirit was none other than the seamless corridor. The fact that Gahan was able to meet Taishang Laojuan's primordial spirit in the seamless corridor was the best evidence. This was because Taishang Laojun had used all of his remaining power to seal the Tongtian sect master's primordial spirit. At the same time, the chaotic space-time in the seamless corridor just happened to confirm the sage relic's words. According to Mingyuan Jindi, not long after she entered the seamless corridor collapsed on its own. The time when Mingyuan Jindi entered the seamless corridor should have happened not long after Gahan left the seamless corridor. Gahan didn't even need to use his but to guess. After all, it was because Taishang Laojun had forcibly sent him away that Taishang Laojun had used up the last of his energy, causing the entire seamless corridor to collapse. This was why Mingyuan Jindi had been thrown out by the seamless corridor. Since the seamless corridor had collapsed, then what of the Tongtian sect master's primordial spirit, which had been sealed away by the seamless corridor? It had most likely escaped from the seamless corridor and returned to the main world. When he thought back to the sage Shard's description of the Tongtian sect master's primordial spirit, which described it as a black crystal, Gahan immediately thought of the black crystal which Mingyuan Jindi had controlled. And when he thought of how that black crystal was constantly absorbing the filth left behind by Yuan Ko after his death, Gahan was so terrified that he almost jumped up. There was a 90% chance that the black crystal was the Tongtian sect master's primordial spirit, which had been sealed away by the seamless corridor. After the seamless corridor had collapsed, the black crystal had also returned to the main world, and then someone had delivered it to Mingyuan Jindi. The most convincing evidence of this was the fact that the black crystal was constantly absorbing filth. At first, Gahan had thought that the black crystal was indeed a human treasure which could prevent the main world from being polluted by filth. But now, it seemed that the reason why the black crystal was absorbing filth was because the Tongtian sect master wanted to be resurrected. This was because all of the filth was actually a fragment of Tongtian's own consciousness. Once the Tongtian sect master absorbed the majority of the scattered fragments of consciousness, the time for the Tongtian sect master's resurrection would come. At that time, Who knew what sort of terrifying things the completely corrupted Tongtian sect master would do to the human world after his resurrection? After understanding this point, Gahan didn't say anything else. He immediately decided to return to Mingyuan City, hoping to obtain the black crystal from Mingyuan Jiandi. At the same time, he wanted to completely control the black crystal, preventing any more filth from entering it and preventing the Tongtian sect master from being resurrected. In order to arrive as quickly as possible, Gahan didn't inform Song Yifei and Lu Shihua, who were waiting outside the tent. He secretly ran back to Mingyuan City through the void alone. Unfortunately, Gahan's return was a little too late. By the time Gahan arrived at Mingyuan City, it had already been completely razed to the ground. Yes, that's right, Mingyuan City had disappeared. The dimensional rift where Mingyuan City used to be had been razed to the ground. Apart from the broken walls all over the ground, there was no longer any trace of Mingyuan City's existence. Even Mingyuan Jiandi had disappeared without a trace. At that moment, Gahan realized that he was a step too late. The Tongtian sect master's spirit had probably been resurrected and destroyed Mingyuan City at the same time. As for Mingyuan Jiandi's fate, it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. If Mingyuan Jiandi had died in the hands of the Tongtian sect master, perhaps he would have avenged Mingyuan Jiandi. However, if Mingyuan Jiandi did not die and was captured alive by the Tongtian sect master, one could imagine what kind of pain and torture Mingyuan Jiandi was going through. After returning to the tent, Gahan realized that the situation he was facing now was completely different from before. In the past, as long as he could ascend to the throne and become the emperor, he was confident that he could face all the powerhouses in this world, kill them all, and reshape the human world. However, with the resurrection of the Tongtian sect master, the strongest person in the human world was no longer him, but the Tongtian sect master who was hiding in the dark. Now, the Tongtian sect master might still choose to lurk in the dark because he had not regained all his power. However, once the Tongtian sect master was completely resurrected, the greatest crisis of the human world would come. In the face of such a crisis, Gahan only had one way to deal with it, and that was to make himself stronger to the extent that he could fight the Tongtian sect master head-on. This was probably the reason why the Jiayin sage left the sage crystal to Gahan. Whether it was fleeting Maple, Taishang Laojun, or the Jiayin sage, they all mentioned that a pacifier would automatically be born in the main world, and this pacifier was the only hope to save the whole world. Only this pacifier had a chance to defeat the Tongtian sect master. 1,000 years ago, a pacifier was born, and that was the Kanzu calendar. However, for some reason, Kanzu failed in the end, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. It was not until 1,000 years later that the second pacifier was born. After so many years of fortuitous encounters and adventures, Gahan could unreservedly say that he should be the pacifier, and he was destined to shoulder the heavy responsibility of saving the world, and only he could save the entire world. Taishang Laojun and the Jiayin sage also foresaw this, so they left everything to him, hoping that he could be cultivated and become another sage of the human world, because only a sage could deal with a sage. At the same time, Taishang Laojun and the Jiayin sage also believed that Gahan would definitely be able to take the last step and become a sage. Therefore, in this sage relic, the Jiayin sage told Gahan in detail how he should become a sage. According to the records in the sage relic, there were actually many ways to surpass an emperor sword wielder and become a sage. There were a total of 3,000 ways. Gahan roughly looked through all 3,000 ways and found that most of them were meaningless and impossible to him. Since ancient times, there were only 3 ways to truly become a sage. However, no matter which one of these 3 ways, Gahan had to meet 3 conditions. If one of the conditions was missing, it would be impossible for Gahan to become a sage. Chapter 1494. The first of these 3 conditions was to have the primordial violet chi. Only by obtaining the primordial violet chi could one obtain the approval of the Great Way and have a chance to become a sage. Fortunately, Guhan had obtained a strand of primordial purple aura a long time ago. This strand of primordial purple aura had been given to Guhan by Fleeting Maple. Even now, Guhan still did not understand why Fleeting Maple, who had come from another dimension, had obtained primordial purple aura from the origin world and had given it to him so generously. Although he did not understand this, he did not bother thinking about it. Anyway, the primordial violet chi in Guhan's body was genuine primordial violet chi, and that was enough. The second condition was that Guhan had to master the method of splitting consciousness fragments, which Guhan had already done. Moreover, Guhan had hundreds of millions of consciousness fragments. This requirement could not be more perfect for Guhan. The third condition was that Guhan had to obtain the remains of Pangu. The so-called remains of Pangu actually referred to Pangu's corpse, and it could not be an ordinary corpse, but a corpse that had condensed Pangu's life essence. This was because the main world was in a state of chaos. It was Pangu who gave birth to the Great Way and created the world. In other words, Pangu was the source of all things and powers in this world, and the Great Way itself was born from Pangu's body. To become a sage under the Great Way, one had to obtain Pangu's remains and become one with the Great Way in order to become a sage. Back then, Sage Hongjun obtained Pangu's primordial elixir, which was the jade butterfly of fate, and became a sage. Taishang Lao Jun, Tong Tian, and Yuan Shitianzuan were originally the incarnation of Pangu's primordial spirit. They themselves were Pangu's remains, so this problem was not a problem for them at all. Sage Junti and Sage Jin became sages because they obtained Pangu's weapon, Pangu's axe, and the Bodhi tree, which was transformed from Pangu's wisdom. As for Goddess Nowo, she and her brother Fushi were innate gods that were born before Pangu created the world. They shared the same origin as Pangu, but Pangu grew the fastest and achieved the mission of creating the world. Goddess Nuo and Fushi had only awakened after Pangu's creation of the world. However, because they shared the same origin as Pangu, they later obtained the living soil of the nine heavens, which was transformed from Pangu's essence, and finally became saints. And now it was Guhan's turn. Pangu had been dead for God knows how many years, and the remains of Pangu had long been divided up by those who intended to become saints. How could there be any remains left for Guhan? Theoretically, Guhan couldn't find Pangu's body even if he spent his entire life searching. But as the saying goes, fortune lies in the midst of misfortune. Right now, the best set of Pangu's remains was right in front of Flowing Maple. He believed that everyone understood by now that this set of Pangu's remains was none other than the arrogant and despotic 12 Zhu Wu, who had been hunting humans everywhere. The 12 Zhu Wu were formed from Pangu's blood essence, and their entire bodies were Pangu's remains. They were born in the same way as the three pure ones of Taoism. However, the 12 Zhu Wu were not intelligent enough and could never become saints in their entire lives. They became the only way for Guhan to fulfill the last requirement. This did not conflict with Guhan's original goal. Guhan originally wanted to kill the 12 Zhu Wu, but now he had another goal, and that was to refine the 12 Zhu Wu's blood essence to fulfill the last requirement to become a saint. After all three requirements were fulfilled, Guhan could choose one of the three ways to become a saint to prove his Tao. Among the three ways, the first was to prove his Tao through strength. As the name implied, this method was to continuously accumulate one's strength until it reached the level of a saint. Then, one could defeat the heavenly Tao and directly reach the great Tao to become a saint. The second method was to achieve the Tao by severing the three corpses, which was to sever good, evil, and oneself so that the heavenly Tao could not monitor one's existence. Finally, one could reach the great Tao and become a saint. The third method was to become a saint through virtue. By accumulating unparalleled virtue, one could obtain the recognition of the heavenly Tao and let the heavenly Tao take the initiative to allow one to reach the great Tao and become a saint. This might sound a bit confusing, but let's use a simple analogy. First, One had to understand that the supreme thing in the world was the Great Tao. The Great Tao controlled the operation of all things. Whether it was the origin world or the dimensional world, it controlled the order and rules of all worlds. If one wanted to surpass the Emperor's sword and reach the realm of a saint, one had to obtain the recognition of the Great Tao and obtain the understanding of the order and rules of the Great Tao to become a saint. The heavenly Tao was the incarnation that the Great Tao directly used to control different worlds. It was equivalent to the sun of the Great Tao. Every world had its own heavenly Tao. There were as many heavenly Tao as there were different dimensional worlds. The Great Tao was not something that one could see just because one wanted to. The Great Tao was extremely mysterious. It drifted away from all worlds, and one could not find it even if one wore out iron shoes. The only way to find the Great Tao was through the heavenly Tao. This was the only way to communicate with the Great Tao. The Great Tao was like a general sitting steadily in the central military tent, while the heavenly Tao was like a soldier guarding the entrance of the central military tent. Among the three methods to become a saint mentioned previously, the Tao by strength was to use one's own strength to directly defeat the soldier guarding the entrance of the central military tent. Then, one could openly enter the central military tent to meet the general. The Tao by severing the three corpses to become a saint was to find a way to make oneself invisible and hide from the eyes of the soldier guarding outside the central military tent. Then, one could sneak into the central military tent to meet the general. The Tao by virtue was to bribe the soldier with a large amount of bribes. Finally, the soldier would take the initiative to step aside and let one in. From this, it could be seen that in terms of difficulty, the Tao by strength was naturally the most difficult. The Tao by severing the three corpses was slightly less difficult, and the Tao by virtue was the easiest. So far, no one had been able to walk the path of Tao by strength. In other words, no one had become a saint through the method of Tao by strength. As for Hong Jun, Taishang Lao Jun, and Jiayin, the three of them achieved the position of a saint through the method of severing the three corpses to become a saint. As for Goddess Nvaiwa, Saint Zhuan Ti, as well as the Heavenly Lord Yuan Shi and sect leader Tong Tian, they all achieved the position of a saint through the method of merit. Among them, Goddess Nvaiwa became a saint by relying on the merits of human beings. Saint Zhuan Ti became a saint by relying on the merits of establishing Buddhism. And the Heavenly Lord Yuan Shi established the Chan sect with the help of Taishang Laojun. At the same time, he educated human beings through the Chan sect, which was to teach human beings the merits of cultivating to become immortals. As for sect leader Tong Tian, he did the opposite. He relied on teaching non-human creatures and accumulated merits to become a saint. In fact, in terms of merits, Goddess Nvaiwa's merits were the highest. She created humans and mended the sky. Her merits were boundless. In the end, Goddess Nvaiwa was the weakest among the saints. The merits of sect leader Tong Tian and the Heavenly Lord Yuan Shi were actually far inferior to Goddess Nvaiwa. However, sect leader Tong Tian and the Heavenly Lord Yuan Shi were too heaven-defying. They were formed from Pangu's primordial spirit and were born with the great merits of Pangu's creation of the world. They were only a step away from becoming a saint. As a result, after becoming a saint, the strength of sect leader Tong Tian and the Heavenly Lord Yuan Shi was actually above Goddess Nvaiwa and Saint Zhuan Ti. This was the benefit of having a powerful father. P.S. Regarding the theory of becoming a saint, first of all, I have to thank the great creator of dreaming of divine armaments. I'm just copying from others. However, primordial chaos was formed by the power of many later authors. Various sayings and settings of becoming a saint are only self-justifying under a certain framework. Therefore, I hope that all the readers will not use the settings in other novels to criticize the author for being wrong or the settings are wrong. Of course, it's your right to say it, but it's my right to turn a blind eye to it. As for the current Gahan, he had read these three methods over and over again several times. However, he felt that none of them were suitable for him because the heavenly axiom no longer existed. Yes, you're right. The heavenly axiom no longer existed. In order to surpass the saints and reach an unprecedented height, Hong Jun decided to integrate himself with the heavenly axiom. In other words, he used his own body to integrate with the heavenly axiom and then completely control the heavenly axiom. As long as he controlled the heavenly axiom, Hong Jun would be able to surpass the saints. This was not based on any previous experience. It was completely guessed by Hong Jun himself after tens of millions of years. As a result, Hong Jun was indeed a genius of his generation. He actually gradually integrated himself with the heavenly axiom. This was why Hong Jun had the strength to crush any saints. However, no one knew why Hong Jun died. He was killed by sect leader Tong Tian. When Hong Jun died, the result was that the heavenly axiom, which had gradually integrated with Hong Jun, also died. However, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. The heavenly axiom died, but it did not immediately collapse. Instead, it began to gradually disintegrate. This led to tragedies such as the sinking of China. Later, the saints also realized that there was a big problem with the heavenly axiom. However, the saints did not dare to imagine the fact that the heavenly axiom had died. They thought that there was something wrong with Hong Jun's cultivation. Therefore, they wanted to see their master and simply went to visit him. However, they were ambushed by the scheming sect leader Tong Tian. The battles that happened later that affected all the dimensional worlds accelerated the collapse of the heavenly axiom. Today, 1,000 years later, the heavenly axiom was completely finished. The main world had completely lost the control of the heavenly axiom like a motherless child. Otherwise, no matter how great the remaining power of sect leader Tong Tian was, it was impossible for him to open the dimensional wall of the main world so wantonly and let Yuan Ko enter the main world. If this happened millions of years ago in the untainted land where people worshipped the heavenly axiom, it would definitely scare many people to death. However, Gahan, who was born in modern times, had just heard the word heavenly axiom. Before that, he did not know or care about the heavenly axiom. Even if he knew that the heavenly axiom no longer existed, his emotions did not change. For people in the untainted land, the death of the heavenly axiom was like the death of their mother. For Gahan, the death of the heavenly axiom was like the death of their next-door neighbor, even if the next-door neighbor was their biological mother. However, a biological mother was a biological mother after all. Therefore, in the face of the current situation, Gahan felt troubled. To become a saint, one had to pass the heavenly axiom. However, now that the heavenly axiom was finished, where should Gahan find a new heavenly axiom? This seemed to have become an unsolvable problem. Chapter 1495. The saint who created this saint's relic had already foreseen the existence of this problem. After they defeated sect leader Tong Tian, they had already discovered that the Way of Heaven had been killed. They also knew that after the death of the Way of Heaven, no one could come into contact with the Great Way and become a sage. The saint was well aware of this. At the same time, he also knew that if this problem was not solved, the future generations would not be able to defeat sect leader Tong Tian. Therefore, before creating this saint's relic, the saint and Taishang Lao Jun had planned together and actually came up with a set of solutions to the current predicament. According to the saint, the Way of Heaven was the only way to become a sage. Without the Way of Heaven, it was absolutely impossible to become a sage. Therefore, the Way of Heaven must exist. This was something that could not be avoided. Therefore, the saint proposed a somewhat bizarre method in Gahan's eyes, which was to recreate the Way of Heaven. Yes, you heard it right. The method that the saint came up with was very simple. It was to recreate the Way of Heaven. As long as the Way of Heaven was created, the door to the Great Way would be opened, and future generations would be able to become sages. This sounded like a fantasy. Even after becoming a sage, one could not figure out the rules and methods of the Way of Heaven. How could a guy who had not yet become a sage create a brand new Way of Heaven? However, with the planning and supplementation of the two experts, the saint and Taishang Lao Jun, they actually came up with a way to recreate the Way of Heaven, or rather, a way to recreate the Way of Heaven. In the end, the way of heaven was born from the Great Way. However, after careful investigation, one would find that the appearance of the way of heaven was also related to a conspiracy. The two sides of this conspiracy were the Great Way and Pangu, the two existences that originally coexisted. The Great Way was the most selfless existence in the world because it itself was the collection of all ways. It was not controlled by the thoughts of others. It was only responsible for maintaining the existence and rationality of all rules. It was precisely because of this that all existences that might destroy the rules of the world itself were the thorns in the eyes of the Great Way. The Great Way must destroy these unstable factors. Therefore, although Pangu truly created the entire world, as the creator of the world, Pangu was the most unstable factor in this world. The Great Tao had to kill Pangu. This was the fundamental meaning of the existence of the Great Tao. Therefore, a despicable scene happened. When Pangu successfully created the world and used his own body to support the world, the Great Tao secretly took action and directly killed Pangu, who was already exhausted. In other words, the Great Tao was actually the one who killed Pangu. However, there was nothing strange about this because besides the Great Tao, there was no other existence in this world that could kill Pangu. However, what the Great Tao didn't expect was that Pangu was still thinking about how to maintain the world he created at the moment of his death. At the same time, Pangu also knew that the Great Tao, which instinctively wanted to destroy all unstable factors, would destroy all living beings in this world. This was because as long as a living being was alive, then that living being could become a murderer that destroyed the order and laws of the entire world. It was an existence that the Great Tao had to eliminate. However, Pangu didn't want to see the world he created to be a dead and lifeless world. Therefore, he had to find a way to stop the Great Tao. At the last moment of his death, Pangu thought of a way to stop the Great Tao. That was to create an existence that blocked the Great Tao's way and use this existence to blind the Great Tao's eyes, making it think that the entire world was in an extremely harmonious state and that there was nothing worth destroying. This thing that blocked the Great Tao's eyes was naturally the heavenly Tao. At the last moment, Pangu mixed the remaining 10 billion pieces of his consciousness with his flesh and blood, which represented the entire world, and a mystery that appeared at the moment of his death to create the mysterious existence known as the heavenly Tao. As expected, it successfully blocked the Great Tao and became the firm guard outside the Great Tao's door, blocking all living beings that tried to see the Great Tao. Unless they crossed over the heavenly Tao, they would never be able to see the real Great Tao. At the same time, the consciousness that existed in Pangu's fragments of consciousness to protect the entire world and maintain its peace and eternity merged with the heavenly Tao. Therefore, the heavenly Tao was constantly maintaining the stability of the entire world, trying its best to wipe out the powerful races and existences in the world so that the entire world would be in the hands of a race that wasn't that powerful. This was also why the powerful races, such as the Wu people and the demon race, lost their ruling rights in the world. In the end, a relatively mediocre race like the human race, which was also full of wisdom, took control of the world. This was because this was the result that the heavenly Tao had long since set up. This was the process of the heavenly Tao's appearance. Ordinary people couldn't possibly know the secret of the birth of the world. Only the Saint Jie-in and Taishang Lao-jun, who had come into contact with the heavenly Tao and the Great Tao at the same time and toured the entire Great Tao's rules, could see the dark history that happened at the beginning of the world through the Great Tao's rules and know the root cause of the heavenly Tao's existence. Therefore, if one wanted to recreate the heavenly Tao, Pangu would become the most crucial factor. Without Pangu, it was impossible to create a brand new heavenly Tao. Of course, the real Pangu couldn't be revived, but it wasn't completely impossible to create a fake Pangu, because there were the 12 Zhu Wu, the descendants of Pangu's essence blood. The saints naturally knew the 12 Zhu Wus very well. They naturally knew that the 12 Zhu Wus could create a fake Pangu through the 12 divine fiends formation. Even if it was a fake Pangu, it was enough because the fake Pangu was only a fake of Panga's consciousness and soul, but Panga's body wasn't fake. It was the real Panga's body. Such a Panga's body also represented the entire world and could be used as the flesh and blood to incubate the heavenly Tao. Combining what they said above, the Saint Jia-yin and Taishang Laojun finally came up with a way to recreate the heavenly Tao. First, they had to find a way to make the 12 Zhu Wus form the 12 divine fiends formation, so as to gather the real Panga's body again and use it as the soil to incubate the heavenly Tao. Then, they had to send a large number of consciousness fragments, more than 10 billion, into Panga's body, Zhu Jihong, as the foundation of the heavenly Tao's reunion. The last and most crucial step was that the owner of these consciousness fragments had to defeat Pangu's real body with his own strength. He had to completely strangle Pangu's real body, so as to restore the scene of the great Tao secretly killing Pangu when Pangu created the world. Using Pangu's death as the last medicine, all the consciousness fragments could be purified by Pangu's real body and nurture a brand new heavenly Tao. This was the method that the Saint Jia-yin and Taishang Laojun came up with to recreate the heavenly Tao. It sounded very complicated and impossible to achieve, but it was also the only way for Gahan to become a saint and defeat Tongtian. Gahan had to find a way to achieve all of this. Fortunately, the Saint Jia-yin and Taishang Laojun had already set up the biggest first move for Gahan, which was the 12 Zhu Wus. The Saint Jia-yin had racked his brains to find a dimensional world with 12 Zhu Wus. This dimensional world was very powerful and was second only to the main world. Otherwise, it would not be able to accommodate existences like the 12 Zhu Wus. The dimensional wall of this world was so powerful that even the Tongtian sect's remaining strength could not open the door of the dimensional wall of this world. Therefore, the power that the Saint Jia-yin attached to this dimensional wall was unusual. He did not desperately stop the Tongtian sect from opening the dimensional rift. Instead, he used all his strength to help the Tongtian sect tear an opening and let the 12 Zhu Wus enter the main world. After the 12 Zhu Wus entered the main world, Spirit Mountain was already weak. The Saint's relic had already helped Vairocana get rid of the filthy control again. At the same time, Vairocana had used some latent power that he had set up in the main world to help the humans and the demon race's heavenly court merge. Finally, he sealed the 12 Zhu Wus outside Shanghai Pass and waited for the pacifier to be born a few hundred years later. Then, he would unseal the 12 Zhu Wus and let them form the 12 Capital Heaven Divine Fiend Array. More importantly, in order to let the 12 Zhu Wus get rid of the filthy control and to prevent the Tongtian sect from obstructing them, he had even asked Vairocana to pretend to look for the sealed 12 Zhu Wus alliance and tell the 12 Zhu Wus through Vairocana's mouth. If he wanted the main world to become the Wu people's world again, he had to become a native of this world and teach the 12 Zhu Wus how to get rid of the filthy control. This was a very crucial step. Only by becoming a native of the main world would the born Pangu also become a native of the main world. Only such a Pangu would be able to nurture the main world's heavenly Tao. This was also the reason why the 12 Zhu Wus wanted to make use of Ying Zheng after his resurrection. It turned out that all of this was the scheme of the guide sage. This guy had actually started planning all sorts of things that would happen 1,000 years ago. Gahan, who only thought about all of this, could not help but feel fear from the bottom of his heart. If the guide sage was still alive, perhaps he would not have the chance to make a name for himself. Of course, if the guide sage was still alive, humans would not be able to bear the huge disaster brought about by the Great Apocalypse. All in all, the guide sage and Taishang Laojun had already laid the foundation for the future pacifier to nurture the heavenly Tao. What was left was the pacifier's own good fortune. The pacifier had to rely on his own power to create 10 billion consciousness fragments, and at the same time, possess the strength to kill the real body of Pangu. This was something that the pacifier had to achieve by himself, and was also something that the guide sage and Taishang Laojun could not foresee. They could only pray that the pacifier born in the future would be more powerful, or all the preparations and plans they had made would become nothing more than flowers in the mirror. Chapter 1496. After learning all this, Gahan could not help but feel touched by the sacrifice and plan of the two sages 1,000 years ago. More importantly, he was carrying a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. If he, as the pacifier, could not complete the rest of his task, he would be letting down the final sacrifice of the two sages who sacrificed themselves 1,000 years ago. At this time, there were two things that Gahan needed to do. First, Gahan had to get 10 billion consciousness fragments. This was the easiest thing to do, because after Gahan returned to the main world, he already had 10 billion consciousness fragments. However, the problem was that after Gahan returned to save his disciple, Lu Shihua, he had consumed 5 billion consciousness fragments. Now, there are only 5 billion consciousness fragments left. In other words, Gahan had to split his consciousness fragments again. This sounded easy. After all, splitting consciousness fragments was already a walk in the park for Gahan. However, only Gahan could not help but laugh bitterly in his heart. This was because Gahan knew that if he wanted to split consciousness fragments, his own soul must be in its best state. Otherwise, he would not be able to sustain the consumption of consciousness fragments splitting. However, the problem was that when Gahan's soul rescued Lu Shihua, he had also consumed a lot of his origin. In the following time, he had been busy killing Yuan Ko and exploring Spirit Mountain. He had no chance to restore his soul at all, unless Gahan was willing to sit down and recuperate quietly for about a month. He could forget about restoring his soul. Under normal circumstances, a month was not a big deal. The problem was that nearly 50 days had passed since Yuzhong City was besieged. How could Gahan have a month to restore his soul? Secondly, there was the power to kill Pangu. Through the memories of Pangu that Gahan had obtained from the sage's relic, it was completely impossible for Gahan, who was at the level of an immortal sword, to defeat the real body of Pangu, even if it was a fake real body of Pangu. Even if Gahan's swordsmanship flew to the sky, he would not be able to defeat the real body of Pangu. There is only one way to defeat the real body of Pangu. Gahan had to ascend to the throne immediately. Only with the power of an Emperor Swordbearer could Gahan be qualified to compete with the real body of Pangu. Now the problem was back to the old way. If Gahan wanted to ascend to the throne, he had to repair the celestial trapping sword. In order to repair the celestial trapping sword, he had to pour a large amount of chaos force into it. However, the only person who could do that, Vairocana, was already dead. Everything seemed to have fallen into a vicious cycle that Gahan could not break out of. Fortunately, Gahan found a way to break this endless loop. In the sage's relic, apart from some of the words that the guide saint had told Gahan, as well as the ins and outs of the entire incident, the entire Buddhist cultivation method, as well as the guide saint's own cultivation method, were all gathered in this sage's relic. These methods naturally included the method to refine the chaotic power. If it was any other method, even if all the cultivation details were clearly laid out in front of Gahan, Gahan would not be able to cultivate it. This was because Gahan was, after all, a sword-bearer, which was fundamentally different from the Buddhist cultivation method. Unless Gahan was willing to give up all the sword essence in his body and cultivate the power of vow like a monk from the beginning, he would not be able to grasp these Buddhist cultivation methods. Fortunately, the method to refine the chaotic power was different from other methods. This was because refining the chaotic power required fragments of one's consciousness. Using fragments of one's consciousness as a medium, one could refine the purest chaotic power from the chaotic chi. Gahan made a rough estimate. If he wanted to resurrect the celestial trapping sword, he would need to consume about 3 billion fragments of consciousness to refine enough chaotic power. After seeing this, Gahan could not help but sigh. Even if he found the Jade Emperor and Vairocana at their peak, they might not be able to help him repair the celestial trapping sword. This was because even existences like Vairocana and the Jade Emperor, who were second only to the sages, probably did not have many fragments of consciousness in their bodies. At most, they had about 100 million. If they were to consume such precious fragments of consciousness to refine the chaotic power, they might as well be killed. This would destroy their foundation to become sages. Therefore, even if Gohan went to their doorstep, these two would definitely not help Gohan. The only one who could truly help Gohan repair the celestial trapping sword was Gohan himself. After all, Gohan was the only existence in the world who could split consciousness fragments at will. If this ability was made known to others, the Jade Emperor and Vairocana would probably die from anger. At this point, all the problems returned to the consciousness fragments. If Gohan wanted to achieve his goal of recreating the heavenly law, he would need to take out 13 billion fragments of consciousness. If he wanted to take out 13 billion fragments of consciousness, Gohan's soul would have to be forcefully split twice. Therefore, how to quickly repair his soul became the solution that Gohan had to solve. Naturally, the third sword of the three Green Lotus swords, the Green Lotus Soul Guide, once again appeared in Gohan's mind. In the past, in the seamless corridor, Gohan had also faced the predicament of exhausting his soul. As a result, Gohan had no choice but to have sex with Lu Qingping in order to recover his soul. At the same time, this was the main reason why Artoria and Gohan had parted ways. After all, no one could stand being cuckolded, much less a former king like King Arthur. But then again, the reason why King Arthur had died was because his wife had been cuckolded. This was fate. Although the last time he had used the Green Lotus Soul Guide, it had led to a great tragedy. Of course, Gohan would not give up eating for fear of choking. Therefore, he resolutely decided to use the Green Lotus Soul Guide again and borrow the power of a woman's primordial Een to repair his soul. This was why Gohan had taken the initiative to open the Shiraba. There was no other way. Apart from using Song Yifei's primordial Een to cultivate, Gohan really could not find any other woman to help him in a short period of time. Moreover, Gohan was not the kind of man who would just do anything. If the other party was not someone he loved, Gohan would not be willing to have sex with them so carelessly. Gohan was also a man with principles. However, Gohan did not expect that his actions would cause a dispute between Lu Shihua and Song Yifei. Because Lu Shihua was his disciple, Gohan instinctively excluded Lu Shihua and did not consider the possibility of letting Lu Shihua's virgin primordial Een help him. In the end, Lu Shihua and Song Yifei actually got into a fight. This made Gohan feel a bit of a headache. Matters between men and women, especially those between three men and women, Gohan was really not good at dealing with these. Compared to dealing with the dispute between Song Yifei and Lu Shihua, Gohan wanted to fight with 12 Zhu more. It would be easier this way. Why don't you guys do it together? Gohan, who was feeling a headache, suddenly said this. Song Yifei and Lu Shihua fell silent at the same time. This man was too shameless. How could he say such a thing? What kind of person did he think Song Yifei was? How could he share a husband with another woman? Even if there was really no other way, it was impossible for two women to lie on the same bed. At least they had to sleep separately. Yes, Master. Just as Song Yifei was in a dilemma, Lu Shihua unexpectedly agreed immediately. At the same time, Lu Shihua began to take off his clothes. How can this woman be so shameless? Seeing the change at this time, Song Yifei's face couldn't help changing several times. She thought that Lu Shihua had an instinctive resistance to this matter like her, but she did not expect Lu Shihua to be so obedient. In fact, Song Yifei was still a little unclear about the relationship between Lu Shihua and Gohan. First of all, Lu Shihua had been trained by Gohan as an apprentice for several years. She had long been obedient to Gohan and regarded Gohan's orders as the truth. Even if Gohan asked Lu Shihua to commit suicide, Lu Shihua would immediately kill herself without hesitation for more than a minute, let alone give her body to Gohan. More importantly, Lu Shihua had always been looking for an opportunity to break through the relationship between master and apprentice. If she couldn't find this opportunity, she and Gohan would forever be a pure master and apprentice in this life. Therefore, facing such a sudden sentence from Gohan, Lu Shihua completely threw away all her shame and decided to seize this opportunity no matter what. Even if she had to share a husband with another woman, she had to break through the last line of defense with her master. This way, the relationship between master and apprentice would usher in a new turn for the better. On the other side, looking at Lu Shihua, who took the initiative to enter his tent, Gahan also hesitated. As Gahan hesitated, all of Lu Shihua's clothes had already been taken off, revealing that crystal body. Even if Gahan was unwilling to break through the relationship between him and Lu Shihua, he knew that it was not the time to let Lu Shihua put on his clothes. If he didn't do it, it would be a complete slap on Lu Shihua's face, and Lu Shihua's personality would probably collapse. Forget it. Gahan was not a guy who rigidly adhered to worldly etiquette. A disciple was a disciple. What else could Gahan have to worry about? Ife, go somewhere nearby to relax. If you don't want to be with me anymore, you can leave now. I'm sorry. Gahan sighed and said to Song Ife. Based on Gahan's understanding of Song Ife, at this time, Song Ife would probably feel very humiliated and choose to leave him, just like how Song Ife left Yanjing City back then. However, Gahan couldn't do much because Gahan was really running out of time. No, Song Ife clenched his teeth. Completely out of Gahan's expectation, he actually followed Lu Shihua into Gahan's tent. It doesn't matter to me if there are two. I'm just afraid that you can't take it, Song Ife said bitterly as he took off his clothes. Chapter 1497. Of course, something very strange had happened in the tent. However, it could not be written in the main text. Otherwise, the book would be locked up again. All in all, when the tent was put away, there were 2 less girls in this world, and 2 more women. There's an inexplicable sense of sadness in it. And with the help of the rich Een energy of the 2 immortal sword rank beings, Gahan had successfully split his consciousness to the order of 20 billion. Gahan, what do we do next? Suddenly becoming a bride, Song Yifei's eyes were filled with tenderness and sweetness as she looked at Gahan and asked. This kind of tenderness and sweetness was quite hard for Gahan to bear. It was as if Song Yifei had completely changed into a different person. In contrast, Lu Shihua was exactly the same as before. Even though she had become Gahan's woman, Lu Shihua still looked like that obedient disciple of his. However, Gahan could feel that Lu Shihua's entire heart seemed to have changed. She was no longer the Lu Shihua of the past. Whether this change in their relationship was a good thing or a bad thing, even Gahan himself was not too sure. We're going back to Yuzhong City, Gahan said firmly. After dragging things out for so long, Gahan did not want to drag things out any longer. He had to rush back to Yuzhong City immediately and settle the things he had to do. Song Yifei and Lu Shihua naturally would not refuse. The 3 of them returned to the vicinity of Yuzhong City through the void. The moment they returned to Yuzhong City, the first thing that came into view was, of course, a devastated world. Unlike Yuzhong City, which was surrounded by mountains, the mountains within a radius of 200 kilometers around Yuzhong City were almost completely flattened. The Miling Mountain Range, where Gahan had left Yuzhong City for his first adventure, had now become a huge sinkhole. This mine that had supported Yuzhong City for hundreds of years had completely disappeared. It was not just the Miling Mountain Range. Almost all the mountains were gone. In their place were huge sinkholes that looked like the surface of a moon. This is all the work of the 12th Zhu Wu. Seeing the scenery that he was once so familiar with disappear, Gahan secretly clenched his fists and put all the blame on 12th Zhu Wu. What surprised Gahan was that there was no trace of the 12th Zhu Wu outside Yuzhong City, and the superdimensional wall system of Yuzhong City had completely disappeared. Could it be that our dimensional barrier has already been destroyed by 12 Zhu Wu? Has Yuzhong City fallen? Lu Shihua asked in horror. In Lu Shihua's subconscious, once the dimensional barrier of a base city was destroyed, it meant that the city had most likely been invaded by Yuan Ko, and the people inside must have suffered heavy casualties. No, the dimensional barrier seems to have been abandoned by itself. Gahan roughly glanced at the surrounding environment and said with some confusion, "Look, the city wall of Yuzhong City is intact. There is no trace of damage, not even a trace of burn." It doesn't look like it was attacked by 12 Zhu. And look, there are many people passing through the city gate. If it was Yuan Ko who broke it, the humans would not be so relaxed. Song Yifei and Lu Shihua both thought that what Gahan said made sense. But the problem was, if the dimensional barrier was not broken by Yuan Ko, how did it disappear? I have a bad feeling. It seems that we have to go in and find out. Guhan said lightly, and at the same time, he took out a few pieces of pork from his dimensional pocket and threw them directly at Lu Shihua and Song Yifei's faces. What are you doing, Gahan? Are you crazy? Song Yifei said with hatred as he felt the wet smell of blood on his face. I'm going to help you get a makeover. Gahan's face was solemn. I'm afraid the three of us are famous in Yuzhong City, especially Shihua. There is no human in the world who doesn't know her. If we want to find out the truth, we'd better hide our identities. Otherwise, I think Ing Zheng will be very willing to meet us in advance. Okay, even if what you said makes sense, why did you throw pork at my face? Do you think that throwing a few pieces of pork is like plastic surgery? Before Song Yifei could finish, Gahan put a mirror in Song Yifei's hand. Song Yifei looked at the mirror and was shocked. Was the person in the mirror still herself? She used to be a young and adorable beauty, but now she had become a simple middle-aged woman. Her face was full of wrinkles, and she looked like she was overburdened with worry. Song Yifei looked at Lu Shihua again and found that Lu Shihua had become a middle-aged woman with a scar on the right side of her face. Gahan had also changed his appearance. However, Gahan's age did not change much, but his appearance had completely changed from a handsome young man to a guy with a strange face. If Song Yifei had not smelled Gahan, he would not have recognized Gahan's true identity. I used a fragment of my consciousness to control the nanomachines and did something to the pork on your faces. As long as you don't take the pork off yourself, I promise that no one will recognize you. Gahan said calmly. Although Song Yifei was a little dissatisfied with his appearance, he nodded and went into Yuzhong City with Gahan. Ing Zheng is so shameless. He really wants to be the emperor and make all the humans in the world his slaves. Even if he has saved mankind, this is too much. Gahan and the other two said that they were refugees who had escaped from London. In addition, the management of Yuzhong City was in a mess, or rather, the basic management system had been lost. Therefore, it was easy for Gahan and the others to enter Yuzhong City. At the same time, by chatting with the citizens, they had a general understanding of what had happened in the past 2 months. When Gahan and the others arrived in Yuzhong City, it was already the 9th day after Zhu Wu was killed by Ing Zheng. It was also the day before Ing Zheng was going to ascend the throne in the central palace. After learning about this, Gahan was very glad that he had come back in time. If he had arrived 2 or 3 days later, Zhu would have completely absorbed Ing Zheng's power, and Gahan's chances of winning would have been greatly reduced. After learning about what Ing Zheng had done, Lu Shihua, who loved the people as if they were his own children, nearly rushed straight into Ing Zheng's imperial palace, dragged him out, and gave him a good beating. It was not because Ing Zheng had framed him, but because Ing Zheng wanted to treat all the people under the heaven as his slaves, while he himself was the real emperor. In Lu Shihua's opinion, this was an unacceptable atrocity, and it was something that must be stopped. As for Gahan, after hearing about this, there was no obvious change in his expression. To some extent, Gahan somewhat agreed with Ing Zheng's decision and courage. Human beings did not need a terrible democracy. For human beings who were in danger, dictatorship was the best way to rule. Although the Sword Council could be counted as half a dictatorship, the power of a dictatorship was not enough. There were still many other factors that would restrict it. So, Gahan somewhat approved of Ing Zheng's centralization of power. But it was only a bit of approval. Gahan had never felt that the world belonged to anyone, or even to a single family. It was fine to want to rule humanity, but to want to treat humans like dogs, that was definitely not okay. So, after learning about Ing Zheng's methods, Gahan, who had originally planned to let Ing Zheng live because of his great contribution in saving humanity, retracted his somewhat naive thoughts. That's right. How is Frost Jindy? Where does she live now? Is she also in the palace? After finding out about Ing Zheng, Gohan asked about Liu Ling. "You're talking about Miss Ling." The old man, who had eaten a piece of flatbread from Gohan, told Gohan everything in detail. His face suddenly darkened. He didn't even want to eat the originally fragrant flatbread in his hand anymore. After letting out a long sigh, he faintly said, "I'm sorry, I don't know where Miss Ling is right now. She seems to have disappeared." Disappeared? Gohan's heart jumped. At the same time, he had a bad premonition. He immediately asked, could it be that Frost Jindy disappeared during the battle with the 12 Zhu Wu? That's not it. I heard that when the 12 Zhu Wu all died, Miss Ling was still alive. But after Ing Zheng, His Majesty announced his plan, Miss Ling completely disappeared. AI. Actually, it doesn't matter if Miss Ling disappeared or not. I saw on TV that Miss Ling fought with the 12 Zhu Wu. She has completely lost the ability to reproduce and has become an 80 or 90-year-old woman. She's older than me by 20 or 30 years. Miss Ling doesn't have much longer to live. She might have already died of old age. Is that so? The old man suddenly felt the temperature around him drop by 10 degrees. He couldn't help but shiver from head to toe. When he raised his head to look for the child he had just been talking to, he found that the three people had already disappeared without a trace. I can't have seen a ghost, right? The old man couldn't help but shiver. He ate the flatbread in his hand in one bite and ran away from his original position. Gohan, don't be so angry with me. After asking around about the situation in Yuzhong City, he found that Gohan was in a depressed state. Song Yifei prepared to say a few words to comfort Gohan. We'll first go to the high-purity nuclear fuel warehouse and repair the captive immortal sword, Gohan said calmly. Yes, his tone was extremely calm. Chapter 1498. Gohan had learned how to turn the chaotic chi into chaotic power, and then use the chaotic power to repair the celestial trapping sword. Now, what was blocking the celestial trapping sword was enough chaotic power. Fortunately, Gohan was already prepared for this. When he left Shanhaiguan Pass and saved Yuzhong City from Yuan Ko for the second time, Gohan had already learned that the so-called chaotic chi was actually the high-purity nuclear fuel rods used in Yuzhong City's power generation, which were stored in the warehouse of Yuzhong City. At first, Gohan was a little worried that the nuclear fuel warehouse would be damaged by the attack of the 12 Zhu Wu. Since the 12 Zhu Wu did not even attack Yuzhong City, the nuclear fuel warehouse was naturally in a state of absolute safety. But what made Gohan a little angry was that the nuclear fuel warehouse, which was tightly guarded the last time he came, was almost defenseless now. Except for two gatekeepers who stayed at the sentry post at the entrance of the warehouse. The thousands of security personnel who were originally scattered around the warehouse had disappeared without a trace. As for the reason why these security personnel disappeared, Gohan did not need to ask. He could guess it with just a guess. The reason, of course, was that Ing Zheng was preparing to forcibly ascend to the throne, so he had mobilized all the personnel to build his palace. As for the nuclear fuel warehouse, naturally, no one was willing to guard it anymore. Anyway, this thing itself had absolute, extremely strong defense capabilities, and it did not seem to be a problem in a short period of time. All of you, put up your personal shields. Otherwise, those high-purity nuclear fuel rods will destroy the flesh inside. Gohan snorted coldly and temporarily put these things aside. At the same time, he told Song Yifei and Lu Shihua. The two of them were also well aware of the terrifying damage that high-purity nuclear fuel rods could do to the human body. They did not dare to slack off. They took out their immortal-level sword maidens and put up their personal shields. Then, Gohan directly opened a void door and led the two directly into the warehouse. Not good. The warehouse has been robbed. The moment the three of them left the void and entered the warehouse, Lu Shihua immediately said in alarm. At this time, the warehouse of high-purity nuclear fuel rods could be said to be a mess. The high-purity nuclear fuel rods, which were originally neatly placed and protected by lead jackets, were now messily thrown on the ground. The metal brackets used to hold the high-purity fuel rods had all been dismembered. Judging from the twisted metal brackets, The person who did it seemed to have a certain level of brute force to be able to bend such a hard alloy. After checking the lead jackets on the ground, Lu Shihua was even more shocked to find that out of the 10 lead jackets, 9 were actually empty. In other words, about 9/10 of the high-purity nuclear fuel rods were gone, leaving only their lead jackets. Who is it? Who the hell did this? Does he want to destroy the human race? As a former leader of the human race, Lu Shihua said somewhat crazily when he realized that such an important thing had been stolen. If other things were lost, then so be it. At most, they would just lose some wealth. But high-purity nuclear fuel rods were not ordinary things. If one of them was taken out, it could cause the death of tens of thousands of people. According to calculations, as long as the distribution was reasonable enough, the 86 high-purity nuclear fuel rods would be enough to kill all the ordinary people in Yuzhong City. Such a dangerous thing had actually been lost. How could Lu Shihua not be frightened and angry? This could be a crisis that could lead to the extinction of the entire human race. It's okay. The situation might not be that bad. Gohan's expression was a little playful. Facing the messy warehouse, Gohan did not seem to have too much worry. Instead, there was a faint smile on his face, as if he had already figured out who the thief was. Master, do you already know something? Lu Shihua, who could be said to be very familiar with his master, immediately reacted after seeing Gohan's expression. It seemed that his master already had clues. I'm just guessing something. As Gohan spoke, he paced around the entire warehouse. After going around the entire warehouse, he finally stopped at a place that looked very shiny. Oh my god, who did this? They actually removed all the barrier crystals on the wall. Lu Shihua exclaimed again after seeing this pile of shiny things. When the warehouse was built, in order to prevent the radiation of high-purity nuclear fuel rods from leaking out, the entire warehouse was set up with a total of 24 layers of protection. One of the core layers of protection was the row of barrier crystals directly embedded in the warehouse. These crystals were smelted with special materials. As long as these crystals were embedded in the wall, they could block up to 95% of the radiation of high-purity nuclear fuel rods. It could be said to be the core of the entire warehouse's defense measures. At first, Lu Shihua's attention was focused on the high-purity nuclear fuel rods scattered on the ground, and he did not pay attention to the barrier crystals on the wall. Only now did he realize that the barrier crystals on the wall had been removed and then neatly piled up in this corner of the warehouse. This murderer must want to destroy mankind. Lu Shihua cried out. In Lu Shihua's opinion, this murderer must want to use radiation to destroy mankind. Otherwise, if the murderer did not want to destroy mankind, why would he remove these barrier crystals embedded in the wall? These barrier crystals had no other use other than blocking radiation. If they were sold, their value might not even be as high as a glass bead. Moreover, these barrier crystals were embedded in the wall. Even if an ordinary person wanted to remove a crystal, even with the help of tools, it might take them 1 or 2 hours. But now that all the barrier crystals in the entire warehouse have been removed, how much effort and time did the murderer have to spend to do this? If they did not want to destroy mankind, why would they go through so much trouble to do this? Therefore, Lu Shihua's mood became extremely fearful. Now that almost all the survivors of mankind had gathered in Yuzhong City, the density of people living in the city was frighteningly high. Once these high-purity nuclear fuel rods were taken out, the original 400 million survivors of mankind would probably be reduced to 4 million at most. Don't worry, I have studied the nuclear fuel warehouse. There are 24 lines of defense in this warehouse. Even if there is only one left, it can still block more than 90% of the radiation. I just checked the other defenses. Other than the first barrier crystal that was destroyed by someone, the rest of the defenses are still intact. The radiation that leaked out is less than 1,000th of its original level. It definitely won't pose a threat to humans. Guhan said indifferently. That's right, but we can't just let this matter go like this. We must immediately find out who the thief is, otherwise the entire human race will be in absolute danger. Lu Shihua said with extreme unease. That's easy. If my guess is correct, the thief should still be in the warehouse. Gohan said with a smile. What? Lu Shihua immediately tensed up. At the same time, he began to search the entire warehouse with sword energy, wanting to find the thief that his master said was hiding. Don't bother, the thief is right here. After Gohan finished speaking, he suddenly stretched his arm directly into the barrier crystal and then pulled outwards, directly pulling out a doll-like little person from the barrier crystal pile. A little girl. When Lu Shihua saw clearly what Gohan had pulled out from the pile of barrier crystals, he suddenly screamed. Because the thing in Gohan's hand was actually a little girl. Looking closely, it was a little girl with a big round face and thick short legs. She was extremely cute. However, what Lu Shihua did not understand was why there was such a cute little girl in such a dangerous place. Also, how did this little girl become the thief of the high-purity nuclear fuel rod? Shihua, this is not a little girl. This is a Yuan Ko, and it is a Hong-level Yuan Ko. Compared to Lu Shihua's confusion, Song Yifei reacted immediately and stared at the little girl in Gohan's hand with extreme vigilance. Yuan Ko. Lu Shihua was stunned for a moment. Then, Lu Shihua saw a small tail hanging down from the little Loli's buttocks. It was sandwiched between her legs, and there was a small furry ball at the top. Naturally, it was impossible for a human to have a tail. This little Loli must be a Yuan Ko. Master, be careful. This is a Yuan Ko. Lu Shihua immediately reminded his master. I know it's okay. We are old acquaintances. Gohan smiled slightly, then reached out and grabbed the little girl's tail. At the same time, he squeezed the furry ball hard. Wow, this feeling, it's an addictive feeling. Feeling the softness and comfort of the furry in his hand, Gohan could not help but sigh. It had been more than 20 years since he had touched something so good. Oh no, someone actually dared to touch Kong Na's tail. Kong Na wants to eat him. At the same time that Gohan squeezed hard, the little girl, who was originally sleeping, was awakened. One had to know that, for a dragon, the tail was always one of the most sensitive parts, not to mention that this was Kong Na's tail. Therefore, Kong Na woke up immediately and was ready to teach this guy who dared to touch her tail a lesson. However, after a while, Kong Na realized that something was wrong. It was as if she was being grabbed by someone's hand. Oh, this is too abominable. This is simply incredible. Someone actually dared to grab Kong Na's neck. Kong Na must teach him a good lesson. With this thought, Kong Na prepared to send a bolt of lightning to this reckless guy. But when Kong Na saw the person's face clearly, the lightning that was gathering in her hand instantly disappeared without a trace. At the same time, the angry little face immediately turned into a cute look. Master Gohan, you are back. Don't tell me you want to ride Kong Na again. Kong Na said with a wronged expression. Our Kong Na was born this cute. I don't want to be cute to get away with it. Chapter 1499. There's no need for that at the moment. Gohan threw Kong Na back to the ground. When Kong Na heard that Gohan didn't plan to ride her, she immediately stood up happily and wagged her tail excitedly. Why are you here? Didn't you promise me that you would live near Yuzhong City and protect the safety of Yuzhong City? Why are you hiding here? Gohan knocked on Kong Na's little head and said with dissatisfaction, It's not Kong Na's fault, Master Gohan. Kong Na said aggrievedly, They haven't sent Kong Na food for 5 years. Kong Na is about to starve to death, so Kong Na can only come in to find food herself. Kong Na. Lu Shihua, who was at the side, found the name familiar. After trying hard to recall, he looked at Gohan in surprise and said, Master, this little lowly can't be the thunder dragon that you brought me to see in the past, right? Of course it's her. Who else could it be other than her? Gohan said indifferently. That year, before entering the seamless corridor, Gohan had brought Lu Shihua to find Kong Na. He told Lu Shihua about the agreement between him and Kong Na, and told Lu Shihua to remember to provide Kong Na with enough high-purity nuclear fuel rods. But at that time, Kong Na had been in her dragon form to meet Lu Shihua. Lu Shihua didn't know that after that mighty dragon transformed into human form, it would actually become this cute little lowly. This contrast was a little too cute. It was worth mentioning that when Gahan and Kong Na made the agreement, it was in the form of a female, Gu Xinyuan. Guhan had originally thought that he would have to spend a lot of effort to make Kong Na understand who he was, but in the end, Kong Na was able to instantly recognize him. According to Kong Na herself, every living being had electric currents within their bodies, and every bioelectric current was completely different. She was able to distinguish different people through the differences in electric currents. The bioelectric currents within Guhan and Gu Xinyuan's bodies were exactly the same, which was why Kong Na was able to recognize Guhan at first glance. I'm sorry, Miss Kong Na. 5 years ago, I was framed. I didn't have time to explain to you. So no one sent you food? Lu Shihua said to Kong Na guiltily. Back then, Gahan had given Lu Shihua the role of feeding Kong Na, but in order to keep it a secret, Lu Shihua took charge of the job himself. In the end, after Lu Shihua went missing, Kong Na lost her source of food. Wait, how did you get in here? From the looks of it, you've been here for at least a few years. Back then, Yuzhong City's dimensional barrier was still around. How did you sneak in? Guhan said as he pinched Kong Na's tail. Big sister let me in. Kong Na frowned, feeling wronged. She didn't like the feeling of having her tail held in someone's hand. But when she recalled how she was beaten up by Guhan, Kong Na wisely chose to endure it. I was going to ask for food, but I met Big Sister. I told Big Sister about my situation, and she let me stay here. Big Sister said that I can eat all the food here. Big Sister? You're talking about Liunian Ling, right? Guhan revealed an expression of sudden realization. Not only did Gahan tell Lu Shihua about Kong Na's existence, but Liunian Ling also knew about Kong Na's existence. But Liunian Ling was a little too generous. She actually left such a glutton in the warehouse. Wasn't she afraid that Kong Na would eat all the high-purity fuel rods? If Liunian Ling knew that Kong Na could eat so much that she ate 90% of the nuclear fuel rods in the warehouse in 5 years, she wouldn't have dared to let Kong Na in. I'm hungry again. After talking to Gohan for a long time, Kong Na seemed to have exhausted a lot of energy. She directly picked up half of the high-purity nuclear fuel rod from the ground, and in the horrified eyes of Lu Shihua and Song Yifei, she ate the whole high-purity nuclear fuel rod like eating a lollipop. After a crunch, she swallowed the entire high-purity nuclear fuel rod. Do you want some? It's delicious. After Kong Na finished eating, she did not forget about her new friends. She picked up another 2 high-purity nuclear fuel rods and handed them to Song Yifei and Lu Shihua. She looked at them expectantly, hoping that they could accept her friendship and eat the delicious high-purity nuclear fuel rods in one bite. Thank you. No need. Song Yifei and Lu Shihua wouldn't dare to eat a high-purity fuel rods, even if they had 10 guts. Although they were sword wielders at the sword immortal level, they were still humans. If they ate a high-purity fuel rods, their lives would be over. Don't you like Kong Na? You don't want to eat what Kong Na gives you. When Kong Na heard Song Yifei and Lu Shihua's rejection, Feng Gongzhong immediately had tears in her eyes. She looked at the 2 unlucky children pitifully. It was as if they had committed a heinous crime if they didn't eat Kong Na's food. Why don't we take a bite? Facing Kong Na's extremely adorable gaze, the 2 of them actually had the thought of taking a bite in their hearts. That's enough. How can I eat this? You eat it. Guhan pinched Kong Na's furry little tail, then grabbed the 2 high-purity fuel rods from Kong Na's hands. Just like Kong Na, he ate one of the high-purity fuel rods in one bite. Gahan, you're crazy. Master, seeing that Gahan ate the 2 high-purity fuel rods, Song Yifei and Lu Shihua immediately exclaimed. Was Gahan crazy? Did he want to die? Don't worry. This is just a necessary step to refine the power of chaos. Gohan smiled and explained to the 2 girls who were concerned about him. The 2 girls also remembered that Gohan had indeed learned the method to refine the power of chaos from the Saint's relic, and the high-purity fuel rods were the raw material to refine the power of chaos. However, the 2 girls didn't expect the method to refine the high-purity fuel rods to be so violent that they had to be eaten directly. I'm going to refine the power of chaos now. You 2 watch Kong Na. Don't let her cause trouble. Guhan casually ordered Song Yifei, then sat cross-legged on the ground. Although the fuel rods were already in his stomach, Guhan obviously couldn't refine the two high-purity fuel rods immediately. According to the method on the Saint's Relic, Guhan had to use his own consciousness fragment to fuse and decompose the impure acquired elements in the high-purity fuel rods to obtain the purest power of chaos. Guhan meditated for an hour. When Guhan slowly opened his eyes, the next second, Guhan immediately grabbed the celestial trapping sword in its scabbard and directly injected a light blue light into the celestial trapping sword. When the blue light on the surface of the celestial trapping sword dissipated, it seemed to be more lively than before. You three, take a look. How is celestial trapping sword now? Guhan released the three sword ladies, celestial extinguishing sword, celestial slaying sword, and celestial slayer sword, and let them observe his poor sister. She does look better than before. Our method is correct. The power of chaos can indeed repair the celestial trapping sword. Celestial slaying sword and the other two carefully observed their sister a few times before speaking to Guhan. Is that so? A hint of joy appeared on Guhan's face. What Guhan was most afraid of was that the power of chaos could not repair the celestial trapping sword. If that happened, all his previous efforts would basically be in vain. But, in the next second, a worried expression appeared on celestial slaying sword's face. What's wrong? Is there anything wrong? Looking at celestial slaying sword's expression, Guhan's expression also changed. It's not that there's anything wrong. It's just that celestial trapping sword's injuries are much more serious than we thought. So much power of chaos was injected into her just now, but it seems like it only replenished about 2% of the consumption, celestial slaying sword said. Only 2%. Guhan's expression immediately changed. This was really a terrible situation. Just now, in order to refine 2 high-purity nuclear fuel rods, Guhan had already spent an hour. In other words, Guhan could only replenish 2% of celestial trapping sword's energy in an hour. In order for the celestial trapping sword to really return to the level of an emperor's sword, it would take more than 2 days. However, according to the description on the Saint's Relic, the 12 Zhu Wu's blood pearls would only need 10 days in Ying Zheng's body to completely hatch. In other words, the 12 Zhu Wu's time to break away from Ying Zheng should be tomorrow. This was also the best opportunity for Guhan to defeat the 12 Zhu Wu. This was because the 12 Zhu Wu's resurrection would continue to grow stronger as time passed. By then, the 12 Zhu Wu's would probably not be someone that Guhan could deal with. If he wanted to defeat the 12 Zhu Wu's, his only chance was tomorrow. Guhan definitely could not drag it to the next day. Otherwise, everything would be over. However, the huge problem of the purification speed of the high-purity nuclear fuel rods was in front of Guhan. For a while, Guhan could not think of any good way to speed up his purification speed. Because of this, Guhan felt a great headache. He was about to take the risk and try to eat multiple high-purity nuclear fuel rods at the same time to refine them. However, if he did that, Guhan would have to take a great risk. This was because Guhan's body could barely withstand 2 high-purity nuclear fuel rods. Once the number exceeded this limit, Guhan would not be able to refine them, and his internal organs might even be burned by the high-purity nuclear fuel rods. Even if Guhan did not die and could repair his body on his own, the refining speed of the high-purity nuclear fuel rods was bound to be reduced. Thump! Just as Guhan was struggling with this, the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground was suddenly heard. This was followed by a tremor in the entire warehouse, as if there was an earthquake. On the other side, Kong Na touched her bald little head and said calmly, "Hey, they changed the roll again." Chapter 1500. Kong Na, do dragons still change their horns? Song Yifei asked curiously when he saw the 2 sharp dragon horns on Kong Na's head fall off. No, Kong Na shook her head, feeling wronged. Other dragons don't seem to change their horns, but I, Kong Na, am the only one who is so unlucky. Kong Na picked up the 2 dragon horns that had fallen to the ground. At that moment, it could be seen that on Kong Na's head, there were two new, small white dragon horns with a pointed tip. This looks exactly the same as changing teeth. It's all new teeth pushing out old teeth. Song Yifei looked at Kong Na's two new dragon horns and said curiously, Kong Na, how long do you usually change your dragon horns? I heard that creatures like dragons can easily take tens of thousands of years. Song Yifei continued, That's how it is. Kong Na's short hand touched the protruding new dragon horns on her head, then pouted and said, Originally, it would take me 5,000 years to change a pair of dragon horns, but it's been weird lately. For the past few years, I've been changing my dragon horns almost every year. I don't know why either. Kong Na, you're not sick, are you? Song Yifei rolled his eyes and immediately said with concern, I'm a doctor. I can tell you with certainty that you must be sick if you change your body parts so quickly that it goes against the laws of biology. Oh yes, you might have some kind of endocrine disorder, prostate hyperplasia, cervical erosion, or something like that. What? That's scary. Kong Na was shocked by Song Yifei's words. Endocrine disorder, prostate hyperplasia, cervical erosion. These names sounded like terrifying, incurable diseases, which scared our innocent little lowly Kong Na to death. It's okay. I'm a doctor. I can help you. Song Yifei held back her laughter and said to Kong Na with the seriousness of a doctor, Come, Kong Na, I'll show you the unique skill of traditional Chinese medicine, checking the tail pulse. Listen to me. As long as I rub your tail for more than 10 minutes, I can find out all the problems in your body. As long as I know what illness you have, I can prescribe the right medicine and cure your body. I see. Kong Na fell into hesitation. To Kong Na, who was born with a sensitive tail, it was indeed a matter worthy of careful consideration. All right. In the end, Kong Na's fear of prostatic hyperplasia overcame everything else. She obediently handed her tail to Song Yifei, and Song Yifei held the furry tail with a satisfied expression. Oh my God! No wonder Gahan likes to touch Kong Na's tail so much. The feeling of her tail is just too wonderful. In this world, there's nothing better than being ridden by Gahan. Song Yifei exclaimed in his heart, completely unaware that there seemed to be something strange in his words. While Song Yifei was immersed in the wonderful feeling of Kong Na's tail, Kong Na was frowning and enduring the pain of her tail being tortured by someone. She didn't even notice that someone had walked up to her and taken away the two dragon horns in her hands. Gahan was just a little curious about the dragon horns that Kong Na had replaced, so he took them to have a look. As a result, Gahan was shocked. He immediately took the dragon horn and walked to a corner, then directly put the dragon horn into his mouth and bit hard. Ouch! Gahan couldn't help but let out a cry of pain, then spat out two bloody teeth from his mouth. Master, what's wrong with you? Hearing Gahan's cry of pain, Lu Shihua immediately ran over and asked nervously. It's nothing. Master was stupid, Gahan said with a bitter smile. In fact, it was indeed Gahan who was stupid. Perhaps Gahan was too excited and wanted to eat these two things directly. In the end, Gahan forgot that what he was holding in his hand was not the crunchy, mothball-flavored high-purity nuclear fuel rod from before, but two real dragon horns. Dragon horns could be said to be the hardest part of a dragon's body. Even if Gahan's body had reached the level of an emperor's sword, it was impossible for him to bite off these dragon horns with his teeth. However, it was unrealistic to directly eat such a long dragon horn into one's stomach. In desperation, Gahan could only take out the Zhu Xian sword and use the mysterious 9 swords to slash at the dragon horn. Then, the dragon horn still didn't move at all. This thing is really hard. Seeing that the mysterious 9 swords did not work, Gahan had no choice but to use the killer move of the Chaos Sword technique. Only then did he manage to cut off a small piece of the dragon horn. Then, Gahan directly swallowed it into his stomach. It really works. Gahan's eyes lit up, and he immediately began to meditate and refine the dragon horn in his stomach. After a few minutes, Gahan woke up again. At the same time, he cut the dragon horn into 8 pieces and then ate them all piece by piece. When Gahan completely refined the 2 dragon horns and at the same time, he injected chaotic energy into the celestial trapping sword. After knowing that the celestial trapping sword's repair rate had reached 27%, his face immediately showed an expression of joy. The moment he picked up these two dragon horns, Gahan was surprised to find that the material of these two dragon horns was not ordinary. These two dragon horns looked very ordinary, but Guhan could feel chaotic energy from these dragon horns that was more powerful than the nuclear fuel rods. These dragon horns themselves seemed to be solidified by chaotic energy. Therefore, Gohan immediately realized that if he did not refine the high-purity nuclear fuel rods and directly refine these two dragon horns, would there be a higher efficiency? As soon as he thought of it, Gahan immediately began to experiment. As it turned out, the dragon horns that Kong Na had replaced could indeed be directly refined into chaotic energy, and the ease of refining was far greater than the difficulty of refining high-purity nuclear fuel rods. During the refining, Gohan found that Kong Na's dragon horns were actually more refined high-purity nuclear fuel rods, but many of the impurities in them had been eliminated, leaving only the purest chaotic energy. This saved Gohan a lot of time. When refining the high-purity nuclear fuel rods before, Gohan used almost 3/4 of the time to remove the impurities in the high-purity nuclear fuel rods, and the dragon horns themselves were a collection of high-purity chaotic energy, so naturally, it saved Gohan a lot of time. According to Gohan's estimation, refining these two dragon horns took about 4 hours, and, at the same time, 27% of the celestial trapping sword was repaired. He believed that if he could get 6 more of the same dragon horns, then Gohan could completely repair the celestial trapping sword in a day. Thinking of this, Gohan immediately walked to Kong Na's side and rescued Kong Na, whose tail was still in the hands of Song Yifei. Then, he gently touched Kong Na's little head and said softly, "Kong Na, you said that you change a pair of dragon horns every year, right?" "Yes." "Master Gohan, don't look at Kong Na like that. Kong Na is scared. Is it wrong for Kong Na to change horns? How about Kong Na let you ride me?" Kong Na looked at Gohan in horror and said. It was really rare to see a gentle expression on Gohan's face. Not to mention Kong Na. Even Song Yifei would be afraid if he saw it. "Ahem, give me the dragon horns that you changed, and I promise not to ride you." Gohan coughed, and Kong Na nodded hard. Then, she went straight into the pile of blocking crystals. After a long time, she finally took out the dragon horns that she had accumulated. Not to mention, there were exactly 6 left. It seemed that these were all the dragon horns that Kong Na had changed in the past 5 years. "You really changed so many." Seeing so many dragon horns with his own eyes, Song Yifei could not help but exclaim. Then, he looked at Kong Na and threatened, "You're finished. Your cervical erosion has reached the late stage. Hurry up and hand over your tail. Let me treat you." "Wah, no, Kong Na, I don't want my tail to be grabbed again." Kong Na threw away the dragon horns in her hand and directly rode on Gohan's neck, avoiding Song Yifei's naughty hands. "All right, stop scaring Kong Na." Gohan rolled his eyes at Song Yifei, then grabbed Kong Na from his neck. This little girl kept saying that she did not want to be Gohan's mount, but now she was riding on Gohan as her mount. But Kong Na is really sick. Otherwise, why would she change her dragon horns so frequently? Song Yifei pouted and said playfully. "That's because Kong Na, this idiot, eats too much." Gohan knocked on Kong Na's head and said, "You little idiot, every day you stuff high-purity nuclear fuel rods into your mouth. The amount you eat in a day is equivalent to the amount you used to eat in a month. The dragon horns on your head were originally formed from the indigestible leftovers after digesting the high-purity nuclear fuel rods. In the past, it took 5,000 years to gather the materials needed for 2 dragon horns, but now, it only took 1 year. Of course, you have to change your horns. Based on the refinement of Kong Na's dragon horns just now, Gohan easily figured out the reason behind it. It turned out that Kong Na had eaten too much. With the other 6 dragon horns that Kong Na had replaced in the past 5 years, Gohan's refinement of the chaotic energy began to go smoothly. Very soon, The celestial trapping sword was restored to 95%. It seemed that in another 10 minutes, the celestial trapping sword could completely return to the level of an emperor's sword. At that moment, with the loud sound of gongs and drums outside the warehouse, Ing Zheng's coronation ceremony had begun at the same time. Chapter 1501. Gahan, the guy's about to become the emperor. Are you still not going to show yourself? Song Yifei said to Gahan excitedly when she heard the noise outside the warehouse. Unfortunately, Gahan was still immersed in Kong Na's dragon horn. There was only a little time left before the celestial trapping sword could be repaired. Of course, Gahan would not show up at this time to deal with Ing Zheng. He had to repair the celestial trapping sword first. It's so boring here. Let's go out for a walk. Song Yifei immediately turned to Lu Shihua when she saw that she couldn't do anything to Gahan. After experiencing the three of them being honest with each other, the relationship between Song Yifei and Lu Shihua was naturally different. Lu Shihua had already become Song Yifei's best friend. Master, Lu Shihua actually wanted to go out for a walk. After all, this was Yuzhong City that had raised her for so many years. Lu Shihua really wanted to know what was happening in Yuzhong City. But when she saw her master sitting cross-legged on the ground, meditating, Lu Shihua could not help but show a look of hesitation. Was it really good to leave her master here alone? TSK, are you still afraid that something will happen to him? In this world, other than him, who else has the ability to bully him? Song Yifei grabbed Lu Shihua's little hand and said. Lu Shihua could not help but nod at Song Yifei's words. Indeed, with Gohan's current ability, there was indeed no one in this world who could bully him. Her master did not need anyone's protection at all. Shihua, you haven't gotten the 12-winged angel's sword yet, right? Gohan's time is precious. We can't let him waste it on this. Why don't we go get the 12-winged angel's sword first, so that Gahan doesn't have to waste his time? Song Yifei's words could be said to be the most urgent thought in Lu Shihua's heart. She really could not wait to find her 12-winged angel's sword and become the emperor. Lu Shihua felt that the gap between her and her master was getting bigger and bigger. Only by becoming the emperor could she close the gap between them. Lu Shihua could not wait anymore. All right, let's go find the 12-winged angel sword first. Lu Shihua nodded in the end. Song Yifei immediately opened the void gate. However, when the two of them walked out of the void gate, they found that there were three of them. Sister Yifei, Sister Shihua, Kong Na is so bored staying in the warehouse alone. Can you guys take Kong Na to play? Kong Na rode on Song Yifei's neck and begged him with an adorable expression. No problem. Song Yifei could not stand such a cute expression and immediately nodded in agreement. Soon, the three of them walked toward the direction of the sword pavilion. Because the dragon's horns had fallen off, there were only two small white horns on Kong Na's head. They looked like two white hair clips and didn't arouse the suspicion of the onlookers in the core area. In fact, even if the dragon's horns were still there, Kong Na probably wouldn't arouse any suspicion. This was because most of the people in the core area were rubbing their stomachs and constantly making pitiful wails. These people could only get a simple meal of porridge every day. They didn't even have the strength to speak on such meager food, let alone have the mood to observe other people's heads. Ing Zheng, that son of A.B*TCH, such a rich Yuzhong city, such a rich human population, what have they become in his hands? That son of A.B*TCH, how dare he ascend the throne? Lu Shihua angrily punched the wall next to him when he saw this miserable scene. When Lu Shihua was in power, the entire human society was closely managed by Lu Shihua, and the people's living standards increased by about 30%. At the same time, because Lu Shihua was born in the slums, he greatly increased the living supplies for the people in the slums and did his best to help them get out of poverty. At the same time, by issuing different tasks, he tried his best to guide the sword-bearers to focus on improving the people's livelihood, creating more safe zones and farmlands outside the city, instead of wasting them on the pursuit and annihilation of Yuan Ko. As a result, human food production increased significantly, and the dimensional pocket of Yinjing City once stored enough food to feed the people of Yinjing City for 10 years. It was such a flourishing human society, but when it was handed over to Yingzheng, there was such a scene of people living in poverty. How could Lu Shihua not be angry? It's probably because of the 12 Zhu Wu's invasion. After all, 7 of the 8 base cities were destroyed, and the food supply was almost depleted. It's normal for people to not have enough to eat. Song Yifei said. She was not defending Yingzheng, but simply stating the speculation in her heart. Miss Yifei, you don't know, except for Yinjing City, all the other human bases have been conquered. We humans have long learned how to deal with it, and we know that food is the most important thing for humans. Therefore, before the city is conquered, we will transport all the food in this city to another safe city through the dimensional pocket. A sword bearer of sword immortal level can carry hundreds of large dimensional pockets at the same time, and each large dimensional pocket can contain 10 million tons of food. A few hundred dimensional pockets will contain hundreds of millions of tons of food, which is enough to transport all the food in the entire base city. Therefore, even if the human bases have been conquered countless times, the food has never been lost. Someone as smart as Yingzheng must have thought that this day would come. Of all the food, only about 10% to 20% of it has been lost at most. Most of the food should still be in Yingzheng's control. Before I fell into a coma, the food stored in the 8 bases was enough for the entire human race to eat for 10 years. But now, the human population has been reduced by half, and there are already people dying of hunger everywhere. If I'm not wrong, this food must have been hidden by Yingzheng. I know this guy too well. He likes to control everything in his hands. And if he wants to control the entire human race, other than absolute power, the least he can do is to control the food. This damned beast, for the sake of his own power, he has abandoned so many human lives. The more Lu Shihua spoke, the angrier she became. She could not wait to rush to Yingzheng and give him a slap. Forget it, let it be happy for now. Gahan will naturally deal with him. It is more important for us to find the sword of the seraphim. Song Yifei said to Lu Shihua, and Lu Shihua could only nod helplessly. In fact, Lu Shihua knew that he was no match for Yingzheng. Only by finding the sword of the seraphim could he truly kill Yingzheng. Along the way, they carefully avoided the crowds on the ground and finally arrived at the sword tower in Yuzhong City. But compared to the sword tower that Lu Shihua was very familiar with, the current sword tower looked completely different. About half of the buildings had disappeared, and even the roofs were gone. Only some broken walls were left, a testament to the sword tower's former existence. At the same time, Lu Shihua also noticed that there were all kinds of refugees lying on the ground in the ruins of the sword tower. They were huddled tightly on a small piece of ground, leaning against the wall, as if the wall could bring them a little bit of security. Who was it who tore down my sword pavilion? Seeing the scene before him, Lu Shihua clenched his fists in anger. As the former sword tower master, although the sword tower had brought Lu Shihua a lot of suffering, it was also the most profound memory in Lu Shihua's life. The sword tower was like Lu Shihua's home. Seeing his home reduced to such a state, one could imagine the anger in Lu Shihua's heart. In the end, before Song Yifei could stop them in time, countless streams of sword cheese shot out from Lu Shihua's scabbard, all of them slashing down onto the ground and kicking up a large amount of dust. The surrounding refugees were scared out of their wits as they looked at Lu Shihua and Song Yifei, the two sword wielders who seemed to have gone mad. In fact, Lu Shihua still retained some of his rationality. In the end, he controlled the sword auras to slash at the gaps in the ground. If Lu Shihua had really gone mad, there would have been at least hundreds of casualties in the vicinity. Who is it? Who's causing trouble here? Using sword auras, is he trying to kill people? Naturally, the great commotion in the vicinity of the sword pavilion had attracted the attention of the nearby sword bearers. However, as most of the sword bearers had gone to the imperial palace to attend Yingzheng's coronation ceremony, only one sword bearer came to deal with the matter. It's him. Seeing the sword-bearer who suddenly appeared, Song Yifei and Lu Shihua's faces showed some surprise at the same time. Not only did they know this sword-bearer, but they were also old acquaintances. Ku Rakin, it's you. Song Yifei couldn't help but cry out. You know me? Song Yifei knew Ku Rakin, but Ku Rakin didn't know Song Yifei. Firstly, it had been 20 years, and Song Yifei's figure was no longer the same as before. Secondly, the disguise that Gahan put on their faces was still effective. To Ku Rakin, Song Yifei was just an ordinary woman. Ahem, who doesn't know Sword Immortal Baiju's son? Only then did Song Yifei realize that she couldn't reveal her true identity, so she blurted out an explanation. You actually still remember my father. When Ku Rakin heard this unfamiliar woman, Song Yifei, mention his father's title, he immediately sighed with mixed feelings. 20 years had passed, and the leader of Yuzhong City, Sword Immortal Baiju, had long since disappeared from the public's conversation. Apart from the occasional commemorative activities and the idle chatter of the older generation, Sword Immortal Baiju's name had disappeared for a long time. As a result, it had been 34 years since Ku Rakin heard his father's title from a stranger's mouth. Now, he was shocked to find out that there was still someone who remembered his father, and even knew that he was his son. Naturally, all sorts of feelings welled up in him, and his impression of Song Yifei also improved. His attitude softened a little as he asked, "What are the two of you doing here? Why did you hurt someone?" Chapter 1502. We didn't hurt anyone. Look, there's not even a drop of blood around. My daughter controlled herself well just now. Although she released a lot of sword chi, they all hit the ground. She didn't hurt anyone. Song Yifei explained with a smile. At the same time, he turned Lu Shihua into his own daughter. You? Lu Shihua glared at Song Yifei. Song Yifei gave Lu Shihua a look that said, "Be sensible." Because of Gohan's makeup, Song Yifei looked like an old lady in her 60s or 70s, while Lu Shihua looked like a middle-aged woman in her 40s or 50s. They really looked like a mother and daughter. Seeing Song Yifei's look, Lu Shihua could only snort and play along with Song Yifei. Both of you are sword-bearers? Ku Rakin looked at Song Yifei and Lu Shihua and asked curiously. Yes. Song Yifei nodded. Since the two of you are sword-bearers, you should know the rules of the sword-bearers. Don't throw a tantrum in the future. It would be bad if you hurt others. Take care. Since no one was hurt, Ku Rakin didn't want to care about it anymore. He was ready to leave after saying that. Wait. Song Yifei grabbed Ku Rakin's arm and asked anxiously, Brother, can you tell us where the sword ladies are? We are in a hurry to find some. Why are you looking for sword ladies? Ku Rakin was shocked and asked with a frown. It's like this. My granddaughter is already 18 years old. I wanted to see if she had the talent to become a sword bearer, so I wanted to hold a contract ceremony in the sword pavilion to test it out. But as soon as I arrived, I found that the entire sword pavilion had been emptied and turned into this. What happened here? Where are the sword maidens inside? Song Yifei lifted Kong Na, who was riding on his neck, and waved her in front of Ku Rakin. Kong Na, who was tens of thousands of years old, became Song Yifei's granddaughter. This child is 18 years old. Ku Rakin was shocked by Kong Na. Kong Na looked like she was at most 8 or 9 years old. It was impossible to tell that she was an 18-year-old girl. It can't be helped. My daughter's husband is too irresponsible. He married my daughter, but he still messed around with other women. As a result, my daughter was heartbroken when she was pregnant. This granddaughter is born with a congenital defect. She's still the same height at the age of 18. The doctor said it's a genetic problem, and there's no way to cure it. Song Yifei lied. I see. If your grandmother and mother are both sword bearers, the chances of your granddaughter being a sword bearer are indeed very high. If it were any other time, you would really come to the sword garret to test it out. But unfortunately, it's all over now. All the natural sword ladies in the sword garret in Yuzhong City have been taken away. If you really want to help your granddaughter synchronize, then write a memorial to His Majesty Ing Zheng and apply for it. Ku Rakin shook his head helplessly. Although Ku Rakin addressed Ing Zheng as His Majesty, his tone was full of sarcasm. Even a fool could tell that he was mocking Ing Zheng. What's going on? Since when do we need Ing Zheng's approval to synchronize the sword-bearers? Has Ing Zheng forgotten the rules of the Sword Committee? Lu Shihua, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly said angrily, "Rules? Rules of the Sword Committee?" Ku Rakin sneered, then let out a long sigh and said, "Ever since President Shihua died, we humans have no rules. Now that Ing Zheng has ascended to the throne, his rules are our rules. There's no longer any rules of the Sword Committee. According to the rules set by Ing Zheng, everyone must first become Ing Zheng's people and submit a memorial to him. As for those who want to become sword-bearers, they have to go through many twists and turns to apply to Ing Zheng. Only after getting the approval from His Majesty, Ing Zheng, can they conduct synchronized experiments with the Sword Maiden. This is the new rule, understand?" After Ku Rakin finished, his nose twitched. He asked curiously, "These rules have been announced for more than 10 days. Haven't you heard about it?" "No, we just escaped from London yesterday. We were going to fight the 12 ancestors of sorcery, but we found out that the 12 ancestors of sorcery were dead, and Yuzhong City has become like this. We're still confused." Song Yifei squinted and explained. "Now you know it, right? All right. If you really want your granddaughter to synchronize with the experiment, wait until this farce is over, then submit a memorial to Ing Zheng and wait for his court's approval," Ku Rakin said with a cold smile. "Screw that bullshit memorial. I've never written a memorial to anyone in my life. Ing Zheng is just a guy who's struggling at death's door, and he wants to be my emperor? Dream on." Song Yifei scolded loudly. Her voice was so loud that all the refugees nearby could hear her clearly. Their gazes towards Song Yifei instantly trembled. At the moment when Ing Zheng's authority was at its peak, there was actually someone who dared to scold Ing Zheng in public. This was the first time the refugees had heard of such a thing. Although they really wanted to applaud Song Yifei in their hearts, the refugees could not help but take a step back, instinctively wanting to avoid these two crazy women. "Ku Rakin, do you know where Ing Zheng took the sword ladies?" Song Yifei grabbed Ku Rakin's arm and asked, "How would I know that?" "You should ask Ing Zheng." Although Ku Rakin said he did not know, his eyes were flickering. However, such a lie was useless in front of Lu Shihua, who had been ruling over mankind for 16 years. Lu Shihua said coldly, "You're lying. You know where the sword ladies are, don't you?" "I don't know, stop torturing me. I really don't know anything." Ku Rakin felt that he was unlucky to have met two crazy women. "Bring us there. We'll clear out all the sword ladies there. Let's see if he still has the guts to ask me to write a memorial." Song Yifei grabbed Ku Rakin's arm and said loudly, "You're crazy, let go of me. I don't want to die with you." Ku Rakin was shocked. He did not dare to continue talking to the two. He pushed Song Yifei's hand away and prepared to leave the place. "I say, Ku Rakin, when did you become such a coward? Where is the fearless Ku Rakin who dared to talk back to Gahan on Chanyang Mountain? How did you become such a coward?" Seeing how terrified Ku Rakin was, Song Yifei was reminded of the time when the three of them roamed Chanyang Mountain together. She could no longer hold back her emotions and scolded him. "What did you say? Who are you? Why do you know all this?" Zhu Luren's body instantly stiffened. Who were these two women? Not only did they know about his father, but they also knew about him in the past. They even knew about him and Guhan in the past. Who exactly were these women? "Damn it, Ku Rakin, you've really pissed me off. Look at who I am." Song Yifei could no longer hold it in. She tore off the disguise that was stuck on her face and revealed her original appearance. "Yifei, it's actually you." Zhu Vren was completely shocked. He never thought that he would be able to see Song Yifei at this time. After disappearing for 20 years, she had returned just like that. 3 months ago, when Ing Zheng retreated to Yuzhong City, he forcefully took control of the Sword Garret. After that, Ing Zheng secretly transferred almost 1 million human elites to the Fleeting Time Gap. At the same time, he also transferred all the human sword ladies there. At that time, Ing Zheng used the excuse that the sword ladies were humanity's greatest treasure and should be stored in the safest place. This was to prevent them from being lost when Yuzhong City fell. With this excuse, Ingzheng successfully convinced Long Shi Jiandi and Frost Jiandi. As Frost Jiandi's representative, I was responsible for escorting the sword ladies to the fleeting time gap, so I knew where the sword ladies were stored. Aside from less than 10 people, no one else knew where they were. In a secluded corner, Ku Rakin explained to Song Yifei. Then what's the deal with this broken sword garret? Even if Ingzheng emptied the sword garret, he didn't have to destroy it. Lu Shihua couldn't hold back her anger as she spoke. This piqued Ku Rakin's curiosity. He pointed at Lu Shihua and asked Song Yifei, "Who is she? Why is she so angry? It's as if the sword garret belongs to her." Lu Shihua didn't remove her disguise like Song Yifei did. Lu Shihua and Song Yifei were different. Song Yifei had already disappeared from the human world for 20 years. Even if she revealed her face now, no one would be able to recognize her. But once Lu Shihua's face was revealed, there was no one in the world who wouldn't recognize her. So Lu Shihua continued to maintain her disguise. The sword garret belongs to everyone in Yuzhong. Lu Shihua replied angrily. Song Yifei quickly interrupted. She's a friend of mine. Recently, we both had the same boyfriend, so we've become friends. What the hell, same boyfriend? Ku Rakin was shocked. He didn't have time to think too deeply before Lu Shihua continued to ask about the sword garret. The sword garret used to be fine, but 3 days ago, when Ingzheng was building his palace, he said that the palace lacked some old beams. The wood from Yuzhong City's sword garret was the only wood in Yuzhong City that met Ingzheng's requirements. So Ingzheng tore it down and used it to build his palace. As soon as Ku Rakin finished speaking, he punched a nearby wall. The wall immediately collapsed, scaring Ku Rakin so much that he started sweating profusely. Chapter 1503. Both of you are already immortal sword bearers. Ku Rakin exclaimed as he looked at Song Yifei in shock after coming out from the Gate of the Void. He had never imagined that Song Yifei was already an immortal sword-level sword wielder. After so many years, he was only a spiritual sword-level sword wielder. Zhu Luren could not help but feel a little envious of the gap. Back then, his starting line was far higher than Song Yifei's, but now, the gap between him and Song Yifei was so wide. This made Zhu Luren feel a little uncomfortable. Who asked me to have a good master? Moreover, this has nothing to do with hard work. The most important thing is to find a suitable sword mistress. Ku Rakin, your sword element should have already exceeded 1 million quarks. Don't be anxious. When you find a suitable sword mistress, you can also become an immortal sword bearer. Song Yifei comforted Ku Rakin, and Ku Rakin could only nod helplessly. At the same time, he looked curiously at the other woman beside Song Yifei. This woman had also opened the Gate of the Void just now. It seemed that she was also an immortal sword bearer. However, in Ku Rakin's memory, he had never seen an immortal sword bearer who looked like this woman. He did not know where she came from. Could it be that she was also Ming Yuan, Jindi's disciple? Although he had such doubts in his heart, time did not allow Ku Rakin to continue thinking. At this time, the three of them had already appeared outside the fleeting time gap. Outside the fleeting time gap, it looked like an ordinary mountain with a small lake next to it. The scenery was extremely beautiful. Other than that, there did not seem to be anything unusual. However, everyone knew that there was a cave on this mountain. This cave was the entrance to the fleeting time crevice. As long as they passed through this cave, they would be able to enter the fleeting time crevice. 1,000 years ago, humans used this cave to hide in the fleeting time rift. The Kinzu fleeting time calendar led the swordbearers to guard the entrance of the cave. They fought wave after wave of Yuan Ko until the Yuan Ko suffered heavy casualties. However, they were unable to enter the fleeting time rift, so they had no choice but to give up. It was said that in the past, there were only mountains here and no lake. However, because the attack was too fierce, a huge depression was formed in the ground, and the underground water seeped out, forming a small, sparkling lake. Are we going to fight our way in? I heard that Ing Zheng has arranged for 5 immortal sword wielders to guard the entrance of the fleeting time crevice. I'm afraid we won't be able to barge in. The 3 of them arrived at the entrance of the cave. Looking at the dozen or so sword wielders guarding the entrance, Kurakin said with some difficulty, "To enter the fleeting time rift, the only way was through the entrance of the cave. There was no way to dig another cave. Although the entrance of the fleeting time rift was a cave, it was not in the belly of the mountain. It was just that the entrance coincided with the cave. If one were to dig a hole in the cave from another place, they would only be able to enter the interior of the mountain. There was no way to enter the fleeting time rift. This was also the reason why Yuanko was unable to break into the fleeting time gap. Otherwise, with the number of Yuanko at that time, not to mention digging a cave, even digging an entire mountain would be a piece of cake for them. Therefore, other than entering from the front, the 3 of them had no other way. This is indeed troublesome. Lu Shihua frowned as she looked at the sword-bearers guarding the entrance of the cave. She was not afraid of these immortal sword-wielders. With Lu Shihua's ability, as long as she could join forces with Song Yifei, even 5 immortal sword-wielders would not be able to stop her. However, this would definitely arouse Ing Zheng's suspicions. If Ing Zheng sent his subordinates to secretly move the sword ladies away, then Lu Shihua would have to waste a lot of time. "Follow me," Lu Shihua said to the rest after a moment of hesitation. Song Yifei naturally followed Lu Shihua without hesitation. However, Kurakin felt that something was amiss. This fleeting time rift clearly only had one path, which was the cave. Lu Shihua wanted him to follow, but where could they go? Although he had this suspicion, Kurakin could only follow behind Lu Shihua. After walking around in a circle, they came to the back of the mountain to an empty, flat, grassy field. "It's me. Open the door." Just as Zhu Luren stood still, he heard the woman speak in a somewhat familiar voice. This voice was completely different from the voice Zhu Luren had heard from the woman just now. It was a completely different voice. It seemed that this woman who had been hiding had also hidden her voice. Zhu Luren didn't know who she was and why she was trying so hard to hide herself. However, Kurakin felt that this voice was familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. However, he could not remember whose voice it was. Kurakin did not think for too long, because in the next second, the entire field suddenly shook. At the same time, Kurakin noticed that a 1-meter wide, ordinary field suddenly opened up, revealing a pitch-black cave. There was actually such a mechanism near the fleeting time mountain range. Jules Vren was shocked by this scene. It should be noted that this mountain range was an important place for humans, and it was protected as the last refuge base for humans. Usually, there would be hundreds of sword-wielding people constantly patrolling around the entire mountain range to ensure that Yuanko would not do anything near the mountain range. In such a heavily guarded place, there was actually an entrance to a mechanism, and it was at the core of the mountain range. Who was this woman? How did she know that there was a mechanism here? Was she really a human? Kurakin was shocked by his own guess, and he had the urge to escape from this place. Lu Shihua, on the other hand, did not notice Zhu Vren's expression as he directly jumped into the pitch-black hole. Song Yifei also jumped in, leaving Kurakin alone outside the cave. It was obviously the last time for Kurakin to leave, but after Kurakin stomped his feet, he chose to believe Song Yifei and jumped in together with Song Yifei. Who built this place? After falling in the air for about 3 minutes, Kurakin finally landed on the ground. There was a small space in front of Kurakin, or rather, the space was very small. It was only about 20 square meters, and it felt a little crowded with 3 people. However, when Kurakin saw the small room, he was shocked because of the walls of the room. There's no mistake, the walls are all built with imperial alloy. Kurakin gently touched the walls, and his eyes became more and more shocked. The walls were all built with imperial alloy. Imperial alloy was a precious alloy that could only be made by Emperor sword wielders, and it was usually only used in important places. But here, it was all used to build the walls of the room. If he did not see it with his own eyes, Ku Rakin would definitely not believe his eyes. This is imperial alloy. It's my first time seeing it. After hearing what Ku Rakin said, Song Yifei curiously touched the wall and even rubbed his face against it. Then, he smiled at the other woman and said, "Didn't I hear that imperial alloy is very precious? Isn't it a waste to use it here?" "There's nothing to waste," Lu Shihua said to Song Yifei as he operated on an instrument on the wall. "This place is very important, and it's worth using imperial alloy to protect it. Otherwise, if Yuan Ko enters here, our last refuge will be gone. Moreover, this is only 10 years' worth of production from an Emperor Sword-level sword wielder. If you really think it's a waste, you can create 10 years' worth of production yourself and add it to the Sword Committee's warehouse." Lu Shihua said calmly. "Come on, you go. I don't want to waste my precious time on making some Emperor alloy." Song Yifei stuck out his tongue, and Zhu Vren was completely speechless. Could it be that Song Yifei was already close to ascending to the throne and becoming an emperor? This discovery made Ku Rakin's little heart unable to take it anymore. "All right, it's open," Lu Shihua suddenly said. At that moment, one of the walls suddenly disappeared, and in its place was a shining blue wall. "Come in quickly. This door can only last for 5 seconds. If you're late, you'll be in," Lu Shihua urged the other two. Song Yifei carried Kong Na with one hand and pulled Ku Rakin with the other. When Ku Rakin saw the world in front of him clearly, he was shocked to find himself in a lush green field. This is the fleeting time gap. Ku Rakin looked at the world in front of him, feeling the silt under his feet and the city in front of him. "That's right, this is the fleeting time gap. I actually entered the fleeting time gap." "That's not right. Isn't there only one entrance to the fleeting time gap? Why is there an entrance to the fleeting time gap here? Why didn't I know about this? Could it be?" Ku Rakin raised his head and looked at Lu Shihua in disbelief. "This is a secret entrance. It was built by Kanzu back in the day. Under certain circumstances, this entrance can be used to guide other people into the fleeting time gap. At the same time, it is also the only escape route if the fleeting time gap is breached. You can never put all your eggs in one basket," Lu Shihua said calmly. And, at the same time, he stared at Ku Rakin and said, "Before this, only 3 people in the entire human world knew about this secret. If you dare to reveal the secret of this entrance, I'll kill you myself." Hearing Lu Shihua's cold voice, Ku Rakin could not help but shiver. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.